He smiled at her like she was nothing. After 18 years of being the woman who saved his empire, 18 years of missed birthdays, canceled vacations, and watching her mother age alone, Damian Rourke stood in the center of a ballroom covered in white roses and announced that another woman would now sit in the chair Naomi Ellington had spent nearly 2 decades building. Then he laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, just that quiet, dismissive laugh that powerful men use when they've already decided your value. Naomi can teach her everything she needs to know. If you have ever worked yourself to the bone for someone who never once saw you, not truly, then you already know exactly what Naomi felt in that moment. And if you've ever stayed silent to survive, you know why what she did next changed everything. Before we go further, if this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because the story you're about to hear will stay with you long after it ends. Drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if something in these words hits close to home, press that like button. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Now, let's go back to the morning Naomi Ellington walked into a room expecting a meeting, and walked out carrying the weight of the truth that would bring down an empire. The elevator opened on the 43rd floor at 7:42 in the morning, and Naomi Ellington already knew something was wrong. She couldn't name it. Not yet. It was something in the air. Something too sweet, too quiet, too carefully arranged. After 18 years inside Rourke Metropolitan Holdings, Naomi had learned to read the building the way some women read weather. The temperature of a hallway. The particular silence before a storm. She stepped out carrying her leather portfolio and a coffee she hadn't had time to finish. Her heels clicked against marble that she had personally selected during the building's renovation 7 years earlier. The facilities director had wanted gray. Naomi had argued for warm ivory. She'd been right, as usual, and nobody had ever mentioned it again. That was the pattern. That had always been the pattern. She turned the corner and stopped. The conference room she'd expected was dark. The executive hallway was empty. But from the far end of the floor, from the ballroom that only opened for company-wide events and press announcements, she heard the gentle clink of champagne glasses and the soft murmur of a crowd. Naomi checked her phone. No calendar change, no message from Damian's assistant. Nothing. She walked toward the sound anyway. The ballroom doors were already open. Inside, white roses sat on every table. Crystal light fixtures she had never seen before caught the morning sun coming through floor-to-ceiling windows. A champagne tower stood on a cloth-covered pedestal near the entrance. Staff in white gloves moved between clusters of executives who were talking in the low, excited way people talk when they've been invited to witness something they don't entirely understand yet. Naomi stood at the threshold and counted faces. Investors she knew by name. Board members. The CFO, who glanced at her and then quickly looked away. The head of legal, whose expression shifted in a way that told her he already knew something she didn't. She had been in enough rooms to recognize when she was the last to learn something. That was when Damian entered. He was wearing a charcoal suit she hadn't seen before. His hair was cut. He looked, she thought distantly, like a man who had spent the previous week preparing for a performance. He walked with the particular energy of someone who had rehearsed his own arrival. Shoulders back, chin up, smile already engaged before he crossed the threshold. Beside him was a woman, tall, blonde, the kind of composed and luminous that came from generations of ease and good lighting. She wore an ivory dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and she held Damian's arm with a familiarity that made it clear this was not their first moment together in public. She had simply been kept private until now. Naomi recognized her face from the social pages. Camille Ashford, former Senator Ashford's youngest daughter, philanthropist, equestrian, occasional editorial board member for a nonprofit she'd co-chaired for exactly as long as it had been politically useful. Damian led Camille to the center of the room. The crowd gathered without being asked, which told Naomi that this had been announced to everyone else beforehand. She stood at the edge. "I've asked you all here," Damian said, his voice carrying that easy authority he'd developed over a decade of owning every room he entered, "because I believe the people I work with should hear important news directly." He looked at Camille. "Last Thursday evening, in the private garden of my home in Connecticut, Camille Ashford agreed to become my wife." Applause. Warm, genuine, the kind that rose naturally and kept going. Two of the women near the front looked genuinely moved. The CFO began a standing ovation that seemed slightly desperate in its enthusiasm. Someone popped a cork in the back. Naomi didn't move. She stood absolutely still, her portfolio held in both hands, her coffee cup balanced in her right palm, the heat of it just barely registering against her skin. She was aware, with the precise awareness of a woman who had spent 18 years learning how to be invisible when it served her and visible when it was necessary, that several people were watching her face. She gave them nothing. Damian spoke for another 4 minutes. He talked about the future of the company. He talked about Camille's background, her values, her passion for community and public integrity. He used the word partnership twice and the word legacy 3 times. Naomi had written enough press releases for Damian to recognize his own speechwriting patterns, and she noticed he was using the framing she had developed for the company's last federal contract pitch. He had borrowed her language to describe a future that didn't include her. Then came the moment. Rourke Metropolitan, Damian said, has always believed that how you build matters as much as what you build. That's why I'm proud to announce the creation of our new Ethics and Public Trust Committee, which will be chaired by Camille. Polite approval from the room. Nods. Someone said wonderful, in a tone that made it clear they had no strong feelings either way. Then Damian looked across the ballroom and found Naomi's eyes. She had always hated that about him, the way he could locate her anywhere, the way he used that ability as a kind of intimacy, as evidence of how deeply he paid attention. Naomi, he said warmly, like a man introducing a beloved colleague at a retirement party, has been the institutional memory of this company for nearly 2 decades. There is no one better positioned to help Camille understand the systems, the relationships, and the standards that make Rourke Metropolitan what it is. He smiled. I'm sure Naomi will teach her everything she needs to know. The laughter was light, genuine. People smiled at Naomi the way you smile at someone who's being asked to do something generous and slightly inconvenient, and you're grateful it's them and not you. Naomi looked at Camille, who gave her a small smile that wasn't unkind. Camille didn't know yet. That was the thing. Whatever Camille was, she wasn't cruel. She was simply being placed on a board she had not asked to be placed on, next to a woman whose existence Damian had reduced to a training manual. Then Damian reached the part of the speech he had clearly been building toward. My father always said, he began, his voice dropping slightly, taking on the reverent quality he used whenever he invoked Victor Rourke, that the mark of a true builder is not the scale of what you create, but the integrity of its foundation. He spent his life finding ways to build things that lasted. Damian paused for effect. His motto was simple, and it still guides everything we do here. The room waited. Never build anything you wouldn't trust your own family beneath. Naomi's coffee slipped. She caught it. Nobody noticed. The liquid burned against the back of her hand and she held it, her face unchanged, her body perfectly still. Those words. Those exact words. She had heard them 30 years ago. Not from Victor Rourke's mouth. Not from a motivational poster in a corporate lobby. She had heard them at a kitchen table in a house on Clearwater Street in Baltimore, spoken by a man with ink-stained hands and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. A man who said those words the way people say something they've been thinking about for years before they finally find the right arrangement. Isaiah Ellington. Her father. A structural and systems engineer who had died on a construction site when Naomi was 20 years old. Isaiah D. Ellington, who was buried in Graceland Cemetery with a headstone that read, Beloved Husband and Father, who had never received a single line of credit from the company that had been built, in part, on his mind. Her father's words, coming out of Damian Rourke's mouth, attributed to a dead man named Victor. Naomi set her coffee cup down on the nearest available surface. The windowsill, she thought, or maybe a cocktail table. She couldn't be entirely sure because her vision had gone strange at the edges, the way it did when her body was receiving information that her mind was refusing to immediately process. She breathed. Then she opened her portfolio. She removed her executive badge, the one with her name and title, and the Rourke Metropolitan logo embossed in gold. The one she had carried for 11 years. The one that opened doors in 23 buildings across 4 cities. She walked to Damian's table. She placed the badge next to his fountain pen. She took a breath. Naomi, he said quietly, stepping close. His voice was low, controlled, the voice he used when he wanted to de-escalate without admitting there was anything to escalate. Don't make this emotional. She looked at him. She looked at him the way she had wanted to look at him for years. Not with anger, because anger would have given him exactly what he wanted. A confirmation that she was exactly what powerful men always accused powerful women of being. But with the particular clarity that comes when you finally stop needing someone's approval and can therefore finally see them clearly. I spent 18 years, she said, confusing being useful to you with being respected by you. She picked up her bag. She turned away. The room was very quiet. Naomi Ellington walked through 53 feet of ballroom without looking at a single face. She passed the champagne tower. She passed the flower arrangements she had not been consulted about. She passed the board members and the investors and the CFO, who was staring at his own shoes. She pushed open the door to the hallway. The elevator was waiting. She stepped inside. The doors started to close. And just before they did, she became aware of a man standing near the opposite wall of the hallway. Tall, dark-suited, roughly her age, watching her with an expression that was not pity, not curiosity, but something quieter and more complicated. She had seen his photograph. She had read his file, because reading files was something Damian had made her do for years, building a mental database of allies, competitors, and threats. Lucian Moretti, son of Alessandro Moretti, head of Moretti Logistics and Construction, which held contracts in 7 northeastern cities and had a historical relationship with organized crime that was 2 generations deep and 3 federal investigations old. Damian had told her, on more than one occasion, that Lucian Moretti was the kind of man you smiled at and never turned your back on. Yet here he was. The elevator doors were almost closed. Lucian took one step forward. "My father knew Isaiah Ellington," he said. The doors stopped. Naomi held them open with one hand without thinking. She looked at him, and for the first time in the last 45 minutes, her composure did something it was not supposed to do. It cracked. Just slightly. Just along one edge. "Before my father died," Lucian said, "he left something for you." The elevator made a soft sound. Naomi did not step back inside the building. She did not move toward Lucian. She stood in the space between the closing doors, in the space between the life she had just ended and whatever was waiting on the other side of the next sentence, and she felt something that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. She felt afraid. Not the social fear of being in a room where you don't belong, not the professional fear of making an error in front of powerful people, but the older, deeper fear, the one that lived in her body, not her mind, the kind of fear that means you are standing at the edge of something true. She let the doors open again. She stepped back into the hallway. They stood facing each other. The crowd noise from the ballroom was still faintly audible. The laughter, the clink of glasses, the murmur of people celebrating something that felt increasingly surreal. "Who told you my father's name?" Naomi asked. Lucian reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small card. He held it out. On it was an address in Brooklyn, handwritten in the precise, slanted script of a man who had grown up when penmanship still meant something. "Not here," Lucian said. She looked at the card. She thought about Isaiah Ellington's kitchen table, about her mother. Loretta's hands braided together in her lap at his funeral, about the way Naomi had stood at 18 years old in a black dress that was slightly too big because she'd borrowed it from her aunt, thinking, "I have to take care of everything now," about the 22 years that had passed since. She took the card. It took her 40 minutes to reach the Brooklyn address. She spent most of that time in the back of a car she'd ordered from her phone, watching Manhattan disappear behind her, thinking about what she actually knew versus what she was feeling. What she knew, her father had created a cost control methodology during the 1990s, when he was working as an independent systems consultant. She had grown up hearing him talk about it, the elegant logic of it, the way a construction company could track expenses across dozens of subcontractors without duplicating oversight costs. She remembered sitting on the edge of his desk as a teenager while he explained it, using dice to represent budget allocations because she'd said she learned better with things she could hold. She had never thought to wonder what had happened to that work. Isaiah died. Naomi went to college on scholarship, worked 3 jobs, graduated, and spent the next decade climbing inside a world that hadn't been built with her in mind. She had survived by being twice as good and asking for half as much. She had never thought to follow the thread backward. She should have. Moretti's Brooklyn office was a building that had clearly started as a warehouse and been converted sometime in the 90s into something that straddled the line between functional and intimidating. Security at the entrance was polite, efficient, and made absolutely clear without saying anything directly that you were being assessed the moment you arrived. Lucian was waiting in a room on the second floor. No assistant, no ceremony. A large table, 2 chairs, a steel box that looked like it had survived a fire, and a man who had apparently decided that this particular conversation did not require performance. He sat. She sat. He didn't open the box immediately. "I need you to understand something first," Lucian said. "My father was not a good man. I am not asking you to think well of him or of my family. What I am asking is that you hear what he documented before he died, because he believed he owed it to your father. And I believe he was probably right." "How did Alessandro Moretti know Isaiah Ellington?" Naomi asked. "They were both brought into a job for Rourke Metropolitan in 1998, Lucian said. "Your father as a systems consultant. My father as a subcontractor. Victor Rourke was in trouble financially. The company had overextended on 3 municipal projects and was looking at defaulting. Your father designed a cost control methodology that restructured how they tracked expenses, allocated resources, and reported to investors." He looked at her steadily. "It saved the company. And Victor took credit for it." "Almost immediately," Lucian said. "My father watched it happen. At the time he said nothing because his contracts depended on Rourke remaining solvent and he didn't want complications." His jaw tightened slightly. "My father's version of ethics was situational. I'm aware of that." Naomi's hands were flat on the table. She was keeping them there deliberately, because if she didn't, they might not behave. "What's in the box?" she said. Lucian opened it. The smell of it hit her first. Old smoke, old paper, the particular mustiness of something that had been sealed for a long time. Inside were documents, some partially burned, their edges black and flaking. Photographs. A ledger with handwritten columns of numbers. A clear evidence bag containing a scorched rectangular plastic badge. Naomi leaned forward. She could read the badge through the plastic. Isaiah D. Ellington, Systems Consultant. Rourke Metropolitan Holdings. She had never seen her father's professional badges. She didn't know he'd had one. She had never thought to ask. Her throat closed. She reached for the bag and Lucian let her take it. She held it. Under the table, completely out of Lucian's sight, her hand began to shake. She pressed it against her thigh and breathed until it stopped. "In 1999, Lucian continued, your father discovered that my father and Victor Rourke were manipulating subcontractor invoices and equipment lease agreements on their public contracts, double billing city accounts, fabricating equipment deliveries, the kind of fraud that requires multiple people and significant paperwork to sustain. Isaiah found out. He documented it," Lucian said, "and then, apparently, he made the mistake of confronting Victor directly before he reported it." A pause. "Days later, there was a crane malfunction on a Rourke site." Naomi looked at him. "My father kept records," Lucian said, "because my father, whatever else he was, understood that documents were survival. He kept records of everything, including everything he knew about what happened to Isaiah Ellington. He sealed the box before he died. He left instructions that it should go to Isaiah's daughter if she was ever in a position to use it. He looked at the table. He also left a letter. He removed an envelope from beside the box. Her name was on the front in the same handwriting as the card. She opened it. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten, the ink faded but still completely legible. She read it the way she had taught herself to read difficult things, without rushing, without letting her emotional response outrun her comprehension. She reached the first sentence of the second paragraph. She stopped. She went back and read it again. "If you are reading this, Damian Rourke already knows why your father died." The room was completely quiet. Outside the windows of the converted warehouse, Brooklyn continued its ordinary business. Trucks on the overpass, gulls over the water, the distant sound of a freight horn. Life, uninterrupted, regardless of what was happening to any particular person inside any particular building. Naomi set the letter down. She thought about 18 years of 7 a.m. calls and Sunday afternoon strategy sessions, and Damian's voice in her ear saying, "You are the only person here I truly trust." She thought about the federal audit she had managed in 2017 that had saved the company $40 million and had been publicly attributed to Damian's leadership team. She thought about the contract negotiation in Chicago, where she had sat across the table from a man who refused to make eye contact with her, and she had still won the deal, and afterward Damian had said you were extraordinary in there, and patted her on the shoulder, and she had genuinely thought that was enough. She looked at Lucian Moretti. He knew, she said. Not a question. According to my father's account, Lucian said carefully, Damian was 26 years old when your father died. He was working for Victor at the time. Whether he was involved in decisions about what happened on that site, I cannot tell you from what's in the box. He met her eyes. What I can tell you is that what my father documented is enough to establish what was stolen from your father. The rest is up to what investigators find. Naomi reached back into the box and removed the topmost photograph. It was a photocopy of a handwritten document. A filing stamp was visible in the upper corner. She couldn't read the full content from the reproduction, but she could read the title. Ellington Integrated Cost Control Method. Isaiah D. Ellington, Systems Design Consultant. Her father's name. His work. Filed officially. Documented, stamped, real. She pressed the photograph flat against the table with both hands. She thought about the ballroom that morning, about Damian's voice carrying across the room with perfect confidence. Never build anything you wouldn't trust your own family beneath. About the applause. About Camille in her ivory dress, who hadn't known anything, wasn't guilty of anything, and was still somehow going to benefit from everything that had been taken. She thought about her mother, who was 73 years old and lived alone in Baltimore, and called Naomi every Sunday morning and had never once, in 22 years, spoken about the week after Isaiah's funeral. Not one word. The silence had always felt to Naomi like grief too large to name. She was beginning to understand it might have been something else entirely. I need to speak to my mother, Naomi said. Lucian nodded. He didn't push. He didn't ask what her next move was going to be. He seemed to understand, without being told, that what had just happened inside this room was not the beginning of a negotiation. It was the beginning of something much longer. Naomi stood. She picked up Alessandro's letter. She looked at Lucian. Why are you helping me? She asked. She needed to know. She had learned, over 18 years of corporate life, that people with power do not act in your interest unless they also have an interest of their own. That was not cynicism. That was literacy. Lucian was quiet for a moment. Because my family has operated in this city for 3 generations, partly by benefiting from the silence of people who knew things they weren't allowed to say, he said. My father knew what happened to Isaiah Ellington, and he kept his mouth shut for 30 years because it was convenient. I watched him do it. And when he died and left that box, he stopped, started again. I can't undo what he did, but I can make sure it doesn't keep being buried. She studied him. He wasn't performing. She had spent nearly 2 decades in rooms with men who performed sincerity, and she knew the difference between a man working to convince you and a man simply saying what was true. She didn't trust him, not yet, but she filed the distinction. I'll be in touch, she said. She walked out of the building and back into the Brooklyn afternoon, holding her father's badge in one hand and a dead man's confession in the other. Her phone showed 4 missed calls from Damian's assistant and 1 text from Damian himself. She did not look at it. She pulled up her contacts instead and found the name she hadn't called in 2 years except for their Sunday morning ritual. Loretta Ellington. Mom. She pressed call. It rang twice. Naomi? Her mother's voice, careful, already uncertain. As if she could hear something in the mere fact of the call, the wrong day, the wrong time. Mama, Naomi said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. I need to come home. A pause. What happened? Loretta asked. Naomi looked up at the sky over the water. Gray clouds. The smell of the river. A cargo ship moving slowly on the horizon, patient and enormous, going wherever it was going regardless of anything happening on the shore. I need to ask you something about Daddy, she said, about the week before he died. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that Naomi thought the call might have dropped. Then Loretta breathed. I'll put the kettle on, she said quietly. And Naomi already knew from the sound of those 5 words that she had been right to be afraid. She flagged a car headed south, toward home, toward the truth that had been waiting 22 years for someone to be brave enough, or desperate enough, to finally ask for it. The drive from Brooklyn to Baltimore took 3 hours and 11 minutes, and Naomi spent most of it staring at the back of the headrest in front of her without actually seeing it. She had the steel box on the seat beside her. She hadn't put it in the trunk. She didn't want it out of her reach. That was a feeling she couldn't entirely explain. The same instinct that makes you hold something fragile with both hands, even after you're already safe. She kept coming back to one thing. 18 years, not 17, not 20. 18 years of her life spent inside a building that her father had helped save, working for a man who had known, who had sat in a room and listened to Isaiah Ellington explain his own methodology, and then watched Victor Rourke erase his name from it, and then, decades later, had hired Isaiah's daughter and let her believe she was building something of her own. The question she couldn't answer yet was whether that was coincidence or design. Both possibilities made her sick in different ways. She called Nathaniel Cross somewhere around the Delaware state line. Nathaniel was 51, a former federal prosecutor who had left the DOJ 8 years ago after a politically complicated case that cost him a promotion and gave him a reputation for being difficult. Naomi had worked with him on a compliance review for Rourke Metropolitan in 2019. She had liked him because he spoke in straight lines and didn't seem interested in impressing anyone. He answered on the second ring. "Naomi Ellington," he said, "I heard you resigned this morning." News travels. In this industry, it travels the same speed as gossip, which is faster than news. A pause. "You okay?" "No," she said. "I need to talk to you, off the record until I tell you otherwise." "Where are you?" "Heading to Baltimore. I can be back in the city tomorrow morning." "My office or somewhere else?" "Somewhere else," she said. "I don't know yet what kind of conversation this is going to be, and I'd rather not have it in a place with your name on the door." Another pause, the kind that meant he was thinking, not stalling. "There's a coffee place on Fulton in Carroll Gardens," he said. "Opens at 7. I'll be there." "Thank you." She hung up. The car moved through Delaware in the flat, gray November dark, and Naomi held her father's badge in her lap and tried to remember what she actually knew about the year Isaiah died. She had been 20 years old, home from her sophomore year at Howard University for Thanksgiving weekend. Isaiah had seemed distracted in a way she'd attributed at the time to work stress. He was always taking on more than he should, always pushing against whatever ceiling he'd hit, always believing the next project would be the one that changed things. He had given her a long hug before she went back to campus on Sunday night. She remembered thinking it seemed like more than a hug, longer, tighter, the kind that means something you're not ready to say out loud. He died 11 days later. Naomi had been in the library when her mother called. She remembered the fluorescent lights. She remembered the way the phone felt in her hand when she understood what Loretta was saying. She remembered walking out of the library without her bag and standing in the cold for an unknown amount of time before someone asked if she was all right. She had not been all right. She had gone home and managed it, and then gone back to school because there was nothing else to do. Being still felt more dangerous than moving. She had been moving ever since. The car crossed into Maryland. Loretta Ellington's house sat on a street of modest row homes in a Baltimore neighborhood that had aged in the careful, stubborn way of places where people stay because they belong, not because they can't afford to leave. The lights were on when Naomi arrived just past 9 in the evening. The front door opened before she reached the steps. Loretta was 73 and looked it in the way that women who have carried grief for a long time look it. Not in any single visible feature, but in a kind of compression, a tightness around the eyes that had become permanent, a particular stillness of the face that was not peace but its close cousin, the kind that comes from learning to hold everything in. She looked at the steel box in Naomi's hands. She said nothing. They went inside. Naomi set the box on the kitchen table. The same table, same house, same kitchen, same yellow walls Loretta had repainted twice, but always back to the same color because Isaiah had chosen it. Naomi sat down. Loretta put 2 cups of tea on the table and then sat across from her daughter and folded her hands and looked at the box, the way you look at something you've been expecting for a long time and had started to hope might never come. "Where did you get that?" Loretta asked. "From Lucian Moretti," Naomi said, "son of Alessandro Moretti. Did you know that name?" Loretta's jaw moved. "I knew the name." Then you knew Alessandro was connected to Victor Rourke. I knew your father was working a job connected to both of them. Loretta's voice was careful, measured. She was choosing every word, and Naomi could see it happening. I didn't know the details. Isaiah kept me out of the work details because... She stopped. Because what? Because he knew it was dangerous, and he was trying to protect me. Naomi wrapped both hands around her teacup. Mama, I need you to tell me what happened after he died. Not the official version, the version you never told me. Loretta looked at the table. You were 20 years old, she said. I'm 42 now. I know how old you are, Naomi. Then tell me. The silence lasted long enough that Naomi heard the refrigerator cycling on, the distant sound of a neighbor's television, a car passing outside. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a world that had kept going right through the worst moments of both their lives without pausing for even a second. Loretta picked up her tea, set it down without drinking. About 3 weeks before the accident, she said slowly, your father changed. He started checking the locks before bed. Not once, 3 times. He changed the route he drove to work. He didn't tell me why. I asked and he said it was nothing, which meant it was something, but Isaiah had always managed difficulty quietly, so I waited. Her voice was flat, not emotionless, the opposite of that, so densely packed with feeling that she'd had to compress it just to get words out. 2 days before he died, he told me he was meeting with an attorney. He didn't tell me which attorney or what about. He said it was precautionary. Naomi's hands tightened around the cup. The day after his funeral, Loretta continued, someone broke into this house. The kitchen was very quiet. I was at your Aunt Patricia's. You were still here, staying with your cousins on the other side of the street. They went through his office, his filing cabinet, his desk. Loretta's voice didn't waver, but her hands did, just barely. They didn't take the television. They didn't take the silver. They took the files. Every folder in the cabinet and the papers from his desk drawer, and the backup discs he kept in the coffee tin above the refrigerator. She stopped. I always thought it was strange that they knew about the tin. Not many people knew about it. Did you call the police? Naomi asked, already suspecting. I did, Loretta said. They came, wrote a report. Nothing was recovered. Nothing. A breath. I told them about the files and they said that was unusual, that burglars normally went for valuables. And I could tell from the way the officer wrote it down that he wasn't going to follow that particular thread anywhere useful. Naomi thought about Nathaniel Cross, about what he'd built a career doing before he walked away from it. The next afternoon, Loretta said, I went to the mailbox. Something in her mother's voice changed, a tightening. A register shift so subtle that only someone who had been listening to this particular voice for 42 years would have caught it. There was a photograph. Naomi did not speak. No envelope. No postmark. Somebody had put it directly into the mailbox. Loretta looked at the table. It was a photograph of you, taken from across the street from your school. You were walking out of the side entrance with that green backpack you had that year, the one with the broken zipper you'd fixed with a safety pin. The kitchen went completely still. You were wearing your brown coat, Loretta said, the one with the brass buttons. I'd bought it at the end of the previous winter on clearance. Her voice had gone to something barely above a conversational tone, which was the most frightening thing about it. The way she was saying these words, the way you say words you have said to yourself 10,000 times until they no longer break you open, but still cost you something every time. There was no note, no message, nothing written on the back. Naomi said very quietly, They didn't need to write anything. No, Loretta said, they didn't. The two women looked at each other across the kitchen table where Isaiah Ellington had once explained cost control methodology using dice. I put the photograph in my Bible, Loretta said, and I never told anyone what I knew about why your father changed in those last weeks. And I never pursued anything. And when people asked questions, I said I didn't know anything, because I had a daughter who was 20 years old and already had everything working against her, and I was not going to watch something happen to you. Her chin came up. I am not apologizing for that decision. I'm not asking you to, Naomi said. Good. I'm asking you to help me now. Loretta looked at the steel box again. What's in it? She asked. Naomi told her. She laid it out the way she had laid out complex situations for Damian 100 times, linearly, without editorializing, covering what was documented versus what was inferred. She watched her mother's face as she described the records, the photographs, the ledger. She watched Loretta's expression when she got to the part about Victor stealing Isaiah's methodology. Loretta's expression did not change, which meant she already suspected it. When Naomi finished, Loretta sat with it for a moment. Then she said, "So Damian knew." "According to Alessandro's letter, yes." "For how long?" "We don't know yet. At least since Victor died. Probably longer." Loretta breathed out slowly through her nose. She had that particular look of a woman doing complex emotional accounting, tallying what she'd sacrificed against what was now possible, calculating the exact dimensions of a betrayal she'd only been able to guess at before. "He hired you," Loretta said. "Yes. He hired Isaiah Ellington's daughter and let you spend 18 years. Yes. Naomi. I know, Mama." Loretta stood up. She went to the window and stood with her back to the room for long enough that Naomi wondered if she needed to be left alone. Then Loretta said, to the window, to the dark street beyond it, "Your father was the smartest person I ever met. You know that. And it didn't protect him. It made him a target." She turned around. Her eyes were dry. "You be careful." "I will." "That's not what I mean," Loretta said. "I mean, be careful about what you want out of this. Because you could get justice for your father and lose yourself doing it. He wouldn't have wanted that." Naomi thought about what Damian had said that morning. Don't make this emotional. As if the opposite of emotional was rational. As if the only acceptable response to discovering that your father's work had been stolen and his name erased was to shrug and continue being useful. "I'm not going to lose myself," Naomi said. "I'm going to find out exactly what happened to him, and then I'm going to make sure it's impossible to pretend otherwise." Loretta sat back down. She looked at her daughter for a long moment. "What do you need from me?" she asked. The next morning arrived gray and cold, the way November mornings in New York tend to arrive when they want to remind you that comfort is conditional and warmth is something you have to earn. Nathaniel Cross was already at the table when Naomi arrived at the coffee place on Fulton. He was working through a mug of black coffee and looking at nothing in particular, which was how he always looked when he was actually paying close attention to everything. I was a lean, angular man, salt and pepper at the temples, with the particular economy of movement of someone who had spent years in courtrooms learning that stillness communicated confidence more effectively than anything else. He looked at the steel box she set on the table between them and raised his eyebrows by approximately 2 millimeters. "Start from the beginning," he said. She started from the beginning. He did not interrupt her. He did not take notes. He listened the way professionals who are very good at receiving information listen, completely, without visibly processing, storing everything for later. When she finished, he turned his coffee mug in a slow circle on the table, a habit she remembered from their previous work together. "The insurance report with the impossible timestamp," he said. "Written the night before Isaiah died," Naomi said. "Before the accident." "That's not a clerical error." "No." "And the signature on the document dated 3 days after the funeral." "Forged." Nathaniel turned the mug again. "Do you have physical custody of the originals or copies?" "Alessandro's box has copies. Lucian says his family's attorneys have the originals in a sealed estate archive. We'll need independent authentication on the originals before anything is actionable." He paused. "What about Damian's direct knowledge? The letter from Alessandro says Damian knew. But a dead man's letter saying Damian knew isn't evidence that Damian was involved in what happened to Isaiah." "I know," Naomi said. "And the payment authorization, I haven't seen the original yet. Alessandro's ledger references it. The amount and the recipient match the company that investigated Isaiah's crane." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "If that payment authorization carries Damian's signature," he said carefully, "and if it predates Isaiah's death, you're not looking at a theft and cover-up case anymore. You're looking at something significantly more serious." "I know what I'm looking at," Naomi said. He looked at her across the table. He had the kind of face that was very hard to read, which she had always appreciated, because it meant he was usually saying what he meant rather than performing a reaction. "This is going to get ugly," he said. "Not complicated. Ugly. Damian Rourke has a public profile, political connections, and presumably very good lawyers who are already making calls this morning. The moment you start pulling on these threads formally, his team will make you the story. You understand that?" "They already started yesterday," Naomi said. She pulled out her phone and showed him the first piece. a blind item in a business publication's online column posted late the previous evening. A former executive at a major infrastructure firm, described as having developed inappropriate professional expectations following years of close access, now reportedly pursuing legal action following a leadership announcement. No names, every detail pointing at Naomi. Nathaniel read it. His expression didn't change, which was its own kind of answer. "I need a forensic accountant," Naomi said. "Someone who can work through the ledger and the original filings and establish a documented chain of intellectual property ownership going back to 1998. "I know someone," Nathaniel said. "Priya Shah. She does expert witness work for federal cases. She's exact, she's fast, and she does not rattle." "Set it up." "It'll cost—" "Set it up," Naomi said again. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. "You resigned yesterday morning. You don't have a salary coming in." "I have savings," she said, "and I have 18 years of deferred compensation that Damian's legal team is going to try to challenge, which means I need to move before they freeze what they can reach." She met his eyes. "I need you working on the legal architecture of this by end of week. Intellectual property claim, wrongful cover-up of the underlying theft, obstruction of any historical investigation into Isaiah's death, if we can establish one existed." Nathaniel was quiet. "That's a significant undertaking," he said. "Yes," she said. "It could take years." "Yes," she said again. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he picked up his coffee. "I'll call Priya this afternoon," he said. 3 days later, Damian made his first move. Naomi was at Nathaniel's firm. Not his public office, but a working space the firm kept for sensitive matters, 2 floors below, unmarked. When her phone buzzed with a call from a number she didn't recognize, she almost didn't answer. Then something made her. "Ms. Ellington." A man's voice, smooth, practiced, the voice of someone whose job was to make uncomfortable conversations feel routine. "My name is Robert Harwick. I represent Damian Rourke personally. I was hoping we might have a brief and informal conversation." "About what?" Naomi said. "About the possibility of resolving the current situation in a way that's beneficial for everyone involved." Naomi looked at Nathaniel across the table. He had heard. He gave her a single slow nod. "I'm listening," she said. Harwick laid it out with the practiced ease of someone who did this for a living. Damian was prepared to offer Naomi a comprehensive settlement package, triple her former executive salary, retroactive to her last raise, paid as a lump sum. Stock options at the pre-announcement price, an executive title, Senior Strategic Advisor, Emerita, that could be listed on any future resume without restriction, lifetime comprehensive medical coverage, explicitly including coverage for a dependent parent, a glowing formal reference from Damian himself, delivered in whatever format Naomi preferred. "And in exchange," Naomi said. A brief pause. "In exchange, you would sign a standard comprehensive release of claims, acknowledging that your employment relationship with Rourke Metropolitan has concluded and that you have no outstanding claims against the company, its officers, its founders, or its intellectual property history," Naomi said. A slightly longer pause. "The language would be comprehensive," Harwick said. "And if I decline?" "Mr. Rourke is hopeful that if I decline," Naomi said again, more simply, "then I suspect this situation will become considerably more complicated for everyone involved," Harwick said. He managed to say it without it sounding like a threat. That was the craft of it. "Mr. Rourke genuinely respects your contributions and would prefer a clean resolution." Naomi thought about Loretta at the window, about the photograph of a 20-year-old girl in a brown coat with brass buttons, placed in a mailbox with no return address. "Tell Mr. Rourke," she said, "that I'll be in touch through my legal representative." She hung up. She looked at Nathaniel. "They're scared," he said. "Yes," she said. "That's good and bad." "I know," she said. "Scared people make better decisions and worse ones simultaneously." Within 48 hours, the second move arrived. Not from Harwick, not from Damian directly. From the media. The blind item became something more specific. A business journalist Naomi had known socially for years published a profile, ostensibly about the shifting culture of corporate succession, that included several anonymous quotes from people described as former colleagues of Naomi's. The quotes were careful, legally protected, but their architecture was unmistakable. A woman who had confused professional closeness with personal entitlement. A woman whose reaction to Damian's engagement suggested emotions that had no place in a corporate environment. A woman who had always been, one source noted with apparent sympathy, perhaps a little too invested. Naomi read the piece at 6 in the morning, sitting in the kitchen of the apartment she'd stayed in overnight, a friend's place, because she had decided, on Nathaniel's advice, not to return to her own apartment for at least a week, given that she didn't know yet what access Damian's team might have to her building's management. She read it twice. Then she put the phone face down on the table. The narrative being built around her was one she recognized. She had watched it happen to other women. She had even, she thought with something cold moving through her, helped it happen once. Years ago. A woman who had filed a complaint against a Rourke senior VP and whose reputation had been managed so efficiently and quietly that Naomi hadn't recognized the management for what it was until years later when she understood more about how these things worked. She had been inside the machine. She had believed she was separate from it. She had not been separate from it. That realization didn't break her, but it cost her something. It cost her the last comfortable story she'd been telling herself about who she had been during those 18 years. She picked the phone back up and called Tessa Rowan. Tessa was Naomi's closest colleague at Rourke Metropolitan, had been for 11 years. A systems analyst who had worked under Naomi on the company's most sensitive financial architecture. Tessa was white, 44, from Columbus, Ohio, and had a habit of speaking in complete sentences even when she was nervous, which had always endeared her to Naomi. The phone rang 4 times. 5. 6. Voicemail. "Tessa," Naomi said, keeping her voice level. "It's me. I know things are complicated right now. I'm not asking you to do anything. I just want to talk. Call me back when you can." She hung up. Tessa did not call back that day. She did not call the next day either. On the 3rd day, at 11 in the evening, Naomi's phone lit up with a text from Tessa's number. "I can't talk to you right now. I'm sorry. Please don't call the office." Naomi stared at the message for a long moment. She typed back, "Did they pressure you?" 3 minutes passed. Then, "I can't." Naomi set the phone down. She sat with that for a while. The particular specific loneliness of realizing that someone you trusted has been put in a position where their survival depends on not being your friend. She didn't blame Tessa. She knew exactly what resources Damian's team could bring to bear on a mid-level employee who depended on her job and her health insurance and her professional references. She knew because she had watched it happen from the inside, had told herself she was a fair and decent manager, had not done enough to understand what the machine she was managing inside of could do to people when it needed to. She was understanding more things about herself now. They were not all comfortable things. 2 days later, something worse arrived. Nathaniel called her at 7 in the morning, earlier than he ever called. "There's fabricated evidence," he said, without preamble. "Tell me." Damian's legal team filed a preliminary counterclaim this morning. They're alleging that you removed confidential proprietary documents from Rourke Metropolitan servers before your resignation. They have digital records, access logs, download histories, suggesting you copied protected files from the executive server in the 48 hours prior to your departure. Naomi's grip on the phone tightened. "That's fabricated." "I know," Nathaniel said, "but it's convincingly fabricated. The logs show your credentials, your workstation, your session tokens." "I wasn't in the building in the 48 hours before I resigned," Naomi said. "I came in that morning. That was it." "I know, but the logs don't show that morning. They show the 2 days before. Someone used your credentials remotely, from what appears to be your registered devices, or devices registered to your accounts." Naomi closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. "They've had access to our office systems," she said. "Either that or someone inside your former office cooperated. We'll need to know which." A pause. "This changes the legal picture significantly. They're not just defending against your intellectual property claim. They're pre-building a criminal referral." "They want me facing a corporate espionage allegation," Naomi said. "Yes. So that any claims I make about Isaiah look like a disgruntled employee manufacturing a distraction." "Yes," Nathaniel said. The line was quiet for a moment. "I need Priya to look at those logs," Naomi said. "Already called her this morning. She can start Monday." "Move it to today," Naomi said. She hung up and sat in the quiet of her borrowed kitchen. She thought about what Damian had said the morning of the engagement announcement. "Don't make this emotional." She thought about what she'd said back. I spent 18 years confusing being useful to you with being respected by you. She had thought, walking away from him that morning, that she'd had the last word. She understood now that the conversation had barely started. She called Lucian Moretti. He picked up immediately, which told her he had been expecting the call. "They're building a criminal frame around me," she said. "Yes," Lucian said, not surprised. Not performing sympathy, just present. "I need to know if there are records in your family's archives, anything your father kept, that documents specific payment authorizations from Rourke Metropolitan to the Crane Investigation Company, dates, amounts, signatures." "There are records," Lucian said. "How detailed?" "Detailed enough that my family's attorneys have been very carefully deciding what to do with them for the past several years." Naomi paused. "And what have they decided?" A silence. "That depends," Lucian said slowly, "on how far you intend to take this." "All the way," Naomi said. She said it without hesitation, without performance. Just the flat, clear statement of a woman who had finished calculating and reached an answer. Another pause. Longer, this time. "Then I need to make some calls," Lucian said, "and you need to understand that if I bring my family's records into this formally, I am exposing things that will cost us significantly. Contracts, relationships, legal exposure on historical matters." "I know," Naomi said. "I want to be clear that I understand what I'm agreeing to." "I believe you," she said. And she did, provisionally, because she had learned to hold belief and skepticism simultaneously. It was one of the few things 18 years inside Damian Rourke's orbit had genuinely taught her. "There's something else," Lucian said. His voice changed register slightly. Not dramatic. Careful. The register of a man who has been waiting to say something and is choosing the exact right moment. "My father kept recordings." Naomi went still. "Old cassette recordings," Lucian continued, "from the period when he was working with Victor Rourke and your father. My father was a man who didn't trust verbal agreements. He recorded everything." The kitchen was completely silent. "How many recordings?" Naomi asked. "Several," Lucian said, "but one in particular, made approximately 10 days before your father's death, may be relevant." Naomi's hand was pressed flat against the kitchen table, her palm against the wood, grounding herself through the sensation of something solid. "Does it have voices I would recognize?" she asked. Lucian paused for one more moment. "It has your father's voice," he said, "and my father's, and one other." She waited. "Damian Rourke," Lucian said. "He was 26 years old at the time, but it's his voice. I've heard it enough over the years to be certain." The morning light through the kitchen window was thin and gray and completely ordinary, the kind of light that doesn't acknowledge the weight of what it falls across, that illuminates a destroyed life the same way it illuminates a cup of cooling coffee. Naomi breathed. "I'm coming to Brooklyn," she said. "I thought you might be," Lucian said. She was already reaching for her coat when her phone lit up with an alert from a legal notification service she'd set up the previous week. Rourke Metropolitan Holdings, emergency filing, counterclaim amplified, intellectual property theft. They had escalated the fabricated evidence claim to a formal legal filing. Naomi read it standing in the middle of the kitchen with her coat half on. They weren't trying to settle anymore. They were trying to bury her. She finished putting her coat on. She picked up her bag. She walked out the door. There was no version of the next conversation she was about to have that she could walk away from. Whatever was on that recording, whatever Damian's 26-year-old voice had said in a room 10 days before her father died, she was about to hear it, and after that, there would be no going back to the world where she hadn't. The recording equipment Lucian used was not sophisticated. It was a cassette player from the early 90s, the kind with a built-in speaker and a single red button for playback, sitting on the conference table inside Moretti's Brooklyn boardroom like an artifact from another century, which was exactly what it was. Naomi sat across from it. Lucian sat to her left. His hands were flat on the table, not touching anything, not moving. He had the particular stillness of a man who had already heard what was about to play and was now watching someone else hear it for the first time, which was its own kind of weight. Priya Shah had arrived 20 minutes earlier, a compact, precise woman in her mid-40s with wire-rimmed glasses and a recorder of her own, which she had placed on the table with Lucian's permission and Naomi's, She was there to document. That was her role. She had been told the outline of what the recording contained, and she had listened to the outline with the same expression she probably used to receive all information. Attentive, unreadable, already categorizing. Nathaniel Cross sat at the far end of the table with his legal pad and his black coffee and his face that gave nothing away. Lucian looked at Naomi. "Ready?" he asked. It was the wrong word, and he probably knew it. Nobody was ready for this kind of thing. But it was a word that gave her an action, a nod, a breath, a small physical act of consent, and that was useful. She nodded. He pressed play. The first thing she heard was tape hiss, the particular white noise of magnetic tape from that era, a sound she associated with home recordings, with her father's cassette collection, with the small player he'd kept on his workshop shelf. The sound hit her somewhere below her sternum before anything else happened, and she pressed her feet flat against the floor because she needed something to push against. Then voices. Her father's voice. Isaiah Ellington, at 44 years old, speaking in the precise, unhurried cadence she had been hearing in her memory for 22 years, the voice she heard when she read the words she was trying to understand, the voice she had been unable to fully reconstruct from memory and had not realized was slightly wrong until this moment when she heard the real version and felt the difference like a key turning in a lock that she had forgotten was even locked. Her throat closed completely. She did not move. On the tape, Isaiah was speaking to two other people. One was Alessandro. Naomi recognized the voice from Lucian's description, accented, careful, with the particular formality of a man who had taught himself English as an adult and never quite lost the seams. The third voice was younger, faster, not yet fully in command of itself the way it would become, but already reaching toward that authority, already practicing it. Damian Rourke at 26. Isaiah was saying, with a calm that cost him something audible, "The invoices don't match the delivery records. I've been through them 3 times, Victor. It's not a clerical error. Somebody deliberately created parallel records." A voice she couldn't identify. Older, flatter. Victor, she thought. This must be Victor. Isaiah. "I have copies of both sets," Isaiah said. "The city's copies and your internal copies. They're different documents, same headers, different numbers." A silence on the tape. The kind of silence that has weight. Then Alessandro's voice, quieter. "Isaiah, perhaps we should discuss this separately." "We're past separately," Isaiah said. And in his voice, underneath the calm, Naomi heard something she recognized because she had felt it herself. The specific tension of a man who knows he is in danger and has decided to stand in it anyway. "I'm meeting with the municipal inspector's office tomorrow morning. I wanted to tell you in person before I did. That's the only reason I'm here." Victor said something low and indistinct. Naomi leaned forward instinctively, as if proximity to the player would clarify it, but the words were lost in the tape hiss. Then Damian's voice, younger than she knew it, but already carrying that particular quality of a man who had grown up being listened to and had therefore never learned to question whether he should be, "You need to think very carefully about what you're doing." Isaiah said, "I have thought about it. There are implications beyond—" "I know what the implications are," Isaiah said. His voice had not risen. That was the thing about her father that she remembered, that she had tried to replicate in herself. He never raised his voice when he was serious, only when he wasn't. "I have a daughter. I have a wife. I am aware of what is at stake for my family. I am also aware of what happened to the workers on the Delancey Street job, who were injured on equipment that the maintenance record said was certified when it wasn't. I am aware that 2 of those men cannot work anymore, and I am aware that the city paid for safety standards that were not met because money that was supposed to go to those standards went somewhere else instead." Silence. "If he walks out with those records," Damian said, "we lose everything." Those 8 words. The tape continued for another 40 seconds. Shuffling sounds, something like a chair moving, a door, and then stopped. The boardroom was so quiet that Naomi could hear the building settling, the faint hydraulic breath of the elevator somewhere in the shaft beyond the wall. She was looking at a fixed point on the table's surface, a scratch in the wood, old, filled with years of polish. She was looking at it the way you look at something that has nothing to do with what is happening to you, because your eyes need somewhere to go. That is not the faces of the people in the room, who are watching you receive the worst possible confirmation of something you had not let yourself fully believe until this moment. He knew, not suspected, not vaguely understood. Knew. Had sat in that room 10 days before her father died, had heard Isaiah say he was going to the inspector's office the next morning, and had said if he walks out with those records, we lose everything, and then 10 days later a crane had malfunctioned and Isaiah Ellington had not walked out with anything ever again. 22 years. Damian had hired her 6 years after her father's death and had sat across from her and told her she was the most capable person he'd ever worked with, and he had known. Every performance review, every crisis she had pulled him through, every Sunday afternoon call where he said, "You are the only person here I truly trust," every single one of those 18 years. He had known her name before she walked in the door. Naomi breathed, one breath, controlled, from the diaphragm, the way she'd taught herself to breathe in difficult rooms over 2 decades of difficult rooms. "I need a minute," she said. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. She stood up and walked to the window. Brooklyn below, the harbor beyond it. The same water, the same sky, the same city that had existed through every version of this story. Through Isaiah's death, through Loretta's silence, through 18 years of Naomi building someone else's empire. She pressed one hand against the glass. The cold of it traveled up her palm and into her wrist. She stood there for 90 seconds. She counted them. Then she turned back to the room. "I need the original tape authenticated," she said to Priya. Her voice was completely level. "Chain of custody documentation from Lucian's family archives. Date of recording established independently. Voice analysis on all 3 identifiable voices, Isaiah, Alessandro, and Damian." She looked at Nathaniel. "Can we use this?" Nathaniel had his pen in his hand but hadn't written anything. He looked at her with the specific expression of a man who was adjusting his professional assessment of someone upward in real time. "Authenticated? Yes," he said. "It's not a wiretap. It was recorded by a party to the conversation on his own equipment in a private setting. Legality in New York at that time is complex but navigable, and even where it's not directly admissible, it establishes investigative direction." He paused. "That last statement, if he walks out with those records, we lose everything," said 10 days before Isaiah's death, before a payment authorization Damian allegedly signed to the company that later ruled the accident non-criminal. He stopped. "That's not nothing." "It's not enough on its own," Naomi said. "No," he agreed, "but it's the spine. Everything else hangs from it." She walked back to the table and sat down. "Who else knows this recording exists?" she asked Lucian. "My attorneys. My archivist. The 3 people in this room." He held her gaze. "I kept it sealed until you were in a position to use it. My father's instructions were specific." "Alessandro wanted this to come out," Naomi said. Not quite a question. "Alessandro wanted to die with less weight on him than he'd carried most of his life," Lucian said. "Whether that's the same thing as wanting justice, I honestly couldn't tell you." "It doesn't matter what he wanted," Naomi said. "It matters what he documented." She looked at the cassette player. "Make 3 copies," she said. "I want one with Nathaniel's firm and a sealed evidence protocol, one with an independent archive facility, and one that stays with you." She looked at Lucian. "If anything happens to any of us in the next 60 days, those copies go directly to the New York field office of the FBI." Lucian nodded without hesitation, which told her he'd already considered this. "We move on the municipal archive document next," Naomi said to Priya. "Isaiah's original filing. If we can establish a public record that predates Victor's claimed invention by 2 years, that's the intellectual property foundation. The recording corroborates the motive. The payment authorization, if we can get to it, connects Damian directly to the cover-up of what happened on that site." Priya was already writing. "I can have the archive document authenticated by end of next week." 3 days, Naomi said. Priya looked up at her. 3 days, Naomi said again, not unkindly but without flexibility. Priya nodded and wrote something additional. "There's a problem," Nathaniel said. She looked at him. "The fabricated evidence counterclaim Damian filed this morning." He turned his legal pad so she could see Isaiah's voice and kept writing, because that was what professionals did. And she needed professionals right now more than she needed sympathy. If they escalate it to a formal criminal referral, which they can do within 72 hours of the current filing, You could be looking at a situation where investigators are accessing your devices and accounts before we've had time to establish the foundation of your counter case. Can you block the referral? Delay it. Not block it. We'd need to file a response demonstrating the evidence was fabricated, which requires Priya's technical analysis of the server logs, which takes how long? Naomi asked. Realistically, a week. We don't have a week. I know. The room was quiet. What about Tessa? Priya asked. It was the first time she'd spoken in 20 minutes, and the question landed precisely where it needed to. If she has access to the actual server logs, the real access records versus the fabricated ones, that's the fastest path to demonstrating the plant. She's not talking to me, Naomi said. Damian's team got to her. What does she have to lose by talking? Priya asked. Her job, her professional reference, probably her health insurance, which matters because she has a kid with a medical condition. Naomi said it without bitterness, because she wasn't. She was stating the mechanism. They found the lever and they're using it. What if we went to her directly? Nathaniel said. Not you. Someone she doesn't associate with risk. Naomi thought about that. Maybe, she said. Let me think about how. She left Moretti's building at just past noon and stood on the Brooklyn sidewalk in the cold and thought about what she'd just heard and what she was going to do with it. The thing about receiving confirmation of your worst suspicion was that it didn't actually feel like resolution. She had thought it might, had thought that hearing it finally, hearing Damian's voice say those words, might close something. Instead, it had opened everything wider. The grief that had been organized and managed for 22 years was now irregular, uncontained, leaking through the edges of the management structure she'd built around it. She needed to keep moving. She called Loretta. I heard him, she said when her mother picked up. I heard Daddy's voice. A long silence. Was it? Loretta's voice broke and reformed. Was it okay? The question undid her slightly, the smallness of it, the specific parental worry that even a recording might hurt her daughter. She stood on the sidewalk in the November wind and breathed. It was him, Naomi said. He sounded like himself. Good, Loretta said, very quietly. Then, and the other? Damian was there, Naomi said. 10 days before the accident, he knew Daddy was going to the inspector's office the next morning. The line was silent for long enough that Naomi would have thought the call dropped if she hadn't been able to hear her mother's breathing. Mama. I'm here, Loretta said. I know what I said about being careful, about losing myself. I remember. I still mean it, Naomi said. But I need you to know that I heard him. I heard him, and he was not afraid, and he was doing the right thing, and I'm going to make sure that matters. Another silence. Come home when you can, Loretta said. Soon. She hung up. She had been standing on the sidewalk for 11 minutes. She knew this because she could see the time on her phone, and she had looked at it when she walked out of the building. 11 minutes of being a person who had just heard her dead father's voice on a 30-year-old cassette tape, and then she needed to be a different version of herself again. She flagged a car. The call came at 3:17 in the afternoon. She was back at Nathaniel's workspace, going through the chain of custody documentation for Alessandro's box, when her phone showed a number she recognized as Rourke Metropolitan's legal department. Not Harwick this time, someone else. She almost didn't answer again. Then she did, because the thing about Damian's moves was that she needed to see them coming, and the only way to see them was to stay in contact with whatever they were sending. Ms. Ellington, a woman's voice this time, controlled, professional. I'm Margaret Voss, General Counsel for Rourke Metropolitan. I'm calling as a professional courtesy. Go ahead, Naomi said. We became aware this morning that you've been in contact with Lucian Moretti and that you may be receiving documents from the Moretti family archives. A pause. I want to make you aware that Moretti Logistics is currently party to 3 active civil disputes with Rourke Metropolitan, and any documents produced from their archives in the context of litigation against our company could be challenged as tainted by adverse interest. I appreciate the heads up, Naomi said. Additionally, Voss continued, we have been made aware of certain communications suggesting that you may be planning to release proprietary corporate information to media contacts. I'd like to remind you of the non-disclosure provisions in your employment agreement, which apply to future disclosure of trade secrets, Naomi said, not to historical documentation of fraud. She said it cleanly,
without heat.
If you'd like to discuss the specific provisions, my attorney is Nathaniel Cross. You can reach his office directly. A beat. Miss Ellington, Voss said, dropping the professional courtesy register slightly, going to something more direct. I want to be straightforward with you. The counterclaim we filed this morning is one component of a response we're prepared to pursue comprehensively. We believe we have the documentation to pursue a criminal referral within the next 48 hours. We are also prepared to approach former clients who may have relationships with you professionally and share information relevant to their due diligence. She paused. I'm telling you this not as a threat, but because I believe you deserve to know the scope of what a prolonged conflict would look like. Naomi said nothing. Mr. Rourke's offer from yesterday still stands, Voss said. The window for that offer is 48 hours from this call. Thank you, Ms. Voss, Naomi said. I'll pass that along to my attorney. She hung up. Nathaniel looked at her from across the table. He had heard everything. They're going after your future clients, he said. Yes. That's scorched earth. Yes, she said. Naomi. He said her name the way people say it when they need to know whether the person is still inside the situation or has gone somewhere else. Where are we? She looked at him. We're exactly where we need to be, she said. They wouldn't be doing this if they weren't scared. Scared people with resources are more dangerous than calm people with resources, Nathaniel said. You know that. I know, she said, which means we need to move faster than we planned. At 5:45 that evening, Priya called from her office. I have a preliminary read on the server logs, she said, her voice carrying the careful excitement of someone who has found something significant and is doing the professional thing of not inflating it before it's confirmed. The access logs they submitted in the counterclaim, the ones showing your credentials downloading files, there are timestamp inconsistencies. The session tokens they attributed to your remote login don't match the geographic metadata. Meaning, Naomi said, meaning whoever accessed those files wasn't in New York. The session originated from an IP address that traces to a commercial VPN service, which is consistent with someone trying to mask their location. But the VPN service they used has a known timestamp synchronization issue. Their server time runs approximately 4 minutes ahead of UTC, and the logs Damian's team submitted show that drift signature. Priya paused. A legitimate remote access from your actual devices wouldn't show that drift. Your devices sync to the same time servers the company uses. These logs were created on a different system. Naomi sat with that for a moment. Can you document that in a way that's legally defensible? With another day's work? Yes. You have until tomorrow morning, Naomi said. I need something I can put in front of a judge before Damian's team files the criminal referral. I'll work through the night, Priya said, without drama, simply as a statement of what was going to happen. Naomi almost said thank you, and then thought about something else instead. Priya, she said, when you have the documentation ready, before you send it to Nathaniel. A pause. I want you to send it to Tessa Rowan as well. Just the technical summary. No cover letter, no explanation, just the document. A silence on Priya's end. Why? Because Tessa works in systems analysis. She'll understand exactly what she's looking at. And she has access to the company's original server architecture logs, which would give us a second source of verification. Naomi looked out the window of Nathaniel's workspace at the gray late-afternoon Manhattan sky. She's not talking to me, but she might talk to evidence. Another silence. Okay, Priya said. The night came down over the city the way nights come in November, fast, without ceremony, turning the light from gray to dark before you've noticed it was doing it. Naomi stayed in the workspace until nearly 9, going through the documents from Alessandro's box with Nathaniel, building a chronological framework of what they could prove versus what they could corroborate versus what was still inference. The framework was stronger than she'd thought 3 days ago. It was not yet strong enough. The gap between those two conditions was the space in which Damian had been operating his entire adult life. She left at 9:15 and walked, rather than taking a car, because she needed the air and because she needed the sensation of moving through space under her own power. The city was doing its ordinary evening business around her. Restaurants, foot traffic, the compressed noise of a place with too many people and not enough silence. She walked 11 blocks without looking at her phone. Then she looked at it. A text from an unknown number. She almost deleted it. Then she read the first line. I know what they did to your server access. She stopped walking. She read the rest of the message. It was from Tessa. New number. Not the office extension or the personal cell Naomi had been calling. A number Tessa had apparently acquired specifically for this message. I can't talk on any of my regular lines. They have access to everything on the company network, including my personal phone, which is on the company plan. I made a mistake. They asked me to sign a statement saying I'd seen you remove files from the executive server, and I signed it because I was scared, and I'm sorry, and I know that doesn't fix it, but there's something else. Last Tuesday, I was doing a routine audit of the administrator logs. Not related to any of this, just regular maintenance. And I found a second session layer underneath the primary access logs. A shadow layer. Someone built it into the system architecture more than a year ago. It creates false activity records that mirror legitimate user behavior. It's sophisticated. It's not something a mid-level IT person builds. This was designed by someone who knew the system at a very deep level. I don't know what to do with this. I'm scared. But I can't let you face this without saying something. Naomi read the message twice. A shadow layer, built into the system architecture more than a year ago, designed to fabricate access records that would look like legitimate user behavior. Someone had been building the trap before Naomi had even given them a reason to spring it. She stood on the sidewalk with her phone in her hand and the city moving around her and thought about what that meant. It meant the counterclaim wasn't reactive. It wasn't built in the 72 hours since Naomi walked out of the engagement announcement. The infrastructure of it had been constructed in advance, waiting for a moment when it would be needed. A contingency. An insurance policy against the possibility that Naomi would eventually become a problem. Damian had known, for at least a year, that this day might come. He had been more afraid of her than he had ever let her see. She typed back to Tessa's new number. Are you safe? A minute passed. Then, I think so. I'm not at home tonight, just in case. Naomi typed, I need the administrator logs. The shadow layer documentation. Can you get it without using any company systems? Another minute. Then, I already copied it. I've been carrying it since Tuesday. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. Then, where are you? Naomi looked up at the street sign above her head. She told Tessa where she was. 22 minutes later, a woman in a dark coat and a baseball cap came around the corner from the west side of the block and walked toward her without making eye contact until she was close enough that it would have been strange not to look up. Tessa Rowan's face was drawn. She had the look of someone who hadn't slept properly in several days and had been running on the particular fuel of anxiety and guilt that burns fast and leaves nothing behind. Her eyes were red at the rims. She was holding a messenger bag against her body with both arms crossed over it. She stopped in front of Naomi. I'm sorry, Tessa said. Her voice was rough. I'm so sorry. I knew it wasn't right, and I signed it anyway because they told me if I didn't cooperate, the entire systems team would be audited, and people would lose their jobs, and I let them use that against me. Tessa, Naomi said. Tessa stopped. I know, Naomi said. I know what they did. I'm not angry at you. Tessa's breath came out in something that was not quite a sob but was close to it. I have the logs, she said. I know. What do you need me to do? Naomi looked at her. I need you to give those to my forensic accountant tonight, and then I need you to be willing to testify to what you found. The shadow layer, the administrator logs, all of it. She held Tessa's gaze. I can't promise you it won't cost you something. It probably will. But I can tell you that what you have in that bag is evidence of something that goes further back than either of us understood. And if we can get it in front of the right people, it can stop what's happening. Tessa looked at her for a long moment. Okay, she said. Just that. Naomi called Priya and told her to meet them. They were 20 minutes from Nathaniel's workspace. Naomi walked beside Tessa in the cold and thought about how the last 12 hours had changed the structure of everything, and how the next 24 would likely change it again. The shadow layer was the piece she hadn't anticipated. It meant the case against Damian was bigger and more premeditated than she'd understood even that morning. It meant there were depths to what he had built and maintained and protected that she hadn't yet reached. She thought about Isaiah's voice on the tape, the particular calm of a man who had made a decision and was not going to be moved from it. She thought about Damian saying if he walks out with those records, we lose everything. She was walking with those records now. All of them. The tape, the documents, the ledger, the badge, Tessa's logs, Alessandro's letter, the municipal archive filing with Isaiah's name at the top. Damian had spent 30 years making sure this collection of evidence could never exist simultaneously in one place, in one person's hands. Here it was. And now the question wasn't whether she had enough to move forward. The question was whether she could survive long enough to use it. Because she had heard Voss's voice that afternoon. The complete, unhurried confidence of a general counsel who believed she was fighting a battle her side had already won. And she understood with cold clarity that Damian Rourke was not going to allow this to proceed through ordinary channels if he could prevent it. He had prevented it once before. He had been 26 years old, and he had looked at a man who was going to do the right thing, and he had said, "If he walks out with those records, we lose everything." He was 60 years old now, and Naomi Ellington was walking toward him with everything her father had tried to carry out of that room 30 years ago. And this time there was no crane waiting, no malfunction to arrange, no silence to buy. This time there was only what came next, and what came next was going to require her to become something she had spent her entire career carefully avoiding being, not the indispensable woman behind the powerful man, not the invisible infrastructure of someone else's legacy, but the person standing at the front of the room when the lights came on. She had never wanted that. She was beginning to understand she had never been given the choice. Priya worked through the night. Naomi knew this because she was there for most of it, sitting at the far end of the workspace table with Alessandro's documents spread in front of her while Priya moved through Tessa's administrator logs with the focused, unhurried intensity of someone who had learned long ago that urgency and speed were not the same thing. Tessa sat in the corner with her coat still on, drinking coffee she wasn't tasting, answering Priya's technical questions in a low voice when they came. Nathaniel arrived at 11:30 with sandwiches nobody wanted and a legal motion he drafted in the car. "Emergency injunction," he said, setting it on the table in front of Naomi. "Requesting a temporary stay of Damian's criminal referral pending independent forensic review of the server logs. If Priya's analysis holds, and I can get this in front of Judge Carver before 9 tomorrow morning, we buy ourselves at least 2 weeks." "Will Carver hear it?" Naomi asked. "Carver doesn't like Rourke Metropolitan," Nathaniel said. "He ruled against them on the Hudson River variance appeal in 2021. That's not a guarantee, but it's a door." "File it," Naomi said. He sat down and kept working. At 2 in the morning, Priya looked up from her screen and said, without preamble, "The shadow layer is real. It was built into the administrator architecture using a proprietary scripting language that Rourke Metropolitan's IT team developed internally for their enterprise system in 2022. It generates false access logs that are internally consistent, same session token patterns, same device signatures, same behavioral rhythms as legitimate user activity." She took her glasses off and pressed her fingers against her eyes for a moment. "It's not something you build in a week. This took months of planning and significant technical resources." "Who would have had the access to build it?" Naomi asked. "Someone with root administrator privileges and detailed knowledge of the proprietary scripting language," Priya said. "That narrows it considerably. I'd estimate fewer than 6 people inside Rourke Metropolitan's IT architecture would have that combination." She paused. "Or someone they hired externally who was given those credentials." "Build a list," Naomi said. "Everyone with root administrator access. I want it cross-referenced with anyone who left the company in the last 18 months, anyone who was hired in the last 2 years, and anyone whose salary increased significantly in the last year." Priya wrote it down without question. Tessa said, from the corner, "Marcus Webb." Both women looked at her. "He was brought in 14 months ago as a special projects IT contractor," Tessa said. "He didn't report to the regular IT director. He reported directly to the executive office. I thought it was unusual at the time, but those things happen, and I didn't push." She looked at Naomi. "He had root access from day one. I remember because the access grant had to go through me for processing, and I flagged it as unusual and was told by Harwick's office that it was approved at the executive level." "Harwick," Naomi said. "Damian's personal attorney." "Yes," Tessa said. "Do you have documentation of that access grant?" "It's in the standard processing log," Tessa said, "which is separate from the shadow layer. The processing logs are a different system. I can pull it." Is it on company systems? The archive copy is on external servers we use for compliance documentation. I have credentials for the compliance archive. Get it, Naomi said. Tessa started working. At 4:15 in the morning, Naomi stepped outside into the November dark and stood on the sidewalk and breathed cold air until her head cleared. She had been inside for 7 hours. Her eyes felt like they'd been lined with sand. Her lower back had developed a specific ache that she recognized as the consequence of sitting on the wrong kind of chair for too long. She rolled her shoulders and looked up at the sky, which was the particular deep city gray of 3 hours before dawn, when the light pollution from the buildings keeps the dark from ever going fully black. She thought about Damian. She thought about him the way you think about someone you've known for almost 2 decades, not as an enemy, which would have been simpler, but as a person. She knew what he ordered for breakfast. She knew the way he got quiet when he was about to make a decision he wasn't sure about. She knew the particular quality of his confidence in a room full of people who were impressed by him, and she knew the different quality of his confidence when he was alone with her, working through something that mattered, which had always been slightly less polished and therefore slightly more real. She had liked that version of him. She had believed it was the true one. Now she understood that the version she had liked was simply another performance, more intimate in its register, calibrated for a smaller audience, but a performance nonetheless. Every version of Damian Rourke was constructed for a specific purpose. The brilliant CEO, the grieving son invoking Victor's legacy, the loyal employer who trusted Naomi above all others, all of it engineered, and underneath it, always, the 26-year-old who had looked at Isaiah Ellington and said, "If he walks out with those records, we lose everything." She went back inside. By 6:45, they had 3 things. They had Priya's forensic analysis of the shadow layer, documented in a 40-page technical report with supporting exhibits. They had the Access grant processing log showing Marcus Webb's credentials had been authorized through Harwick's office 14 months ago. And they had something Naomi had not expected. While pulling the compliance archive, Tessa had found a second document in the same folder as the Access grant, a contract between Rourke Metropolitan and a private data security firm called Veritas Consulting Group, signed 14 months ago, authorizing what was described as a proprietary system architecture enhancement. The contract was 3 pages and written in the deliberately vague language of documents that are designed to be legally defensible without being descriptive. The signatory on behalf of Rourke Metropolitan was not the IT director. It was Damian Rourke. Nathaniel read the contract twice, standing up, holding it with both hands. Then he set it down very carefully on the table. "He signed it himself," he said. "Yes," Naomi said. "That's not how CEOs handle IT contracts." "No," she said. "It's not." A silence. "He was personally involved in commissioning whatever Veritas built," Nathaniel said. "If we can establish that Veritas built the shadow layer and that the shadow layer was used to fabricate evidence against you, that's a direct line from Damian's signature to the fabricated counterclaim." "Can we establish it?" Naomi asked. "Priya?" Priya looked up from her screen. She looked exhausted and precise in equal measure, like a piece of equipment running at the outer edge of its operational parameters. "The scripting patterns in the shadow layer are consistent with known Veritas methodologies. I've seen their work in 2 previous cases. That's not conclusive on its own, but it's a foundation." She paused. "If we can subpoena Veritas's records in the context of a formal investigation, the technical evidence would be comprehensive." "We're not at subpoena stage yet," Nathaniel said. "No," Naomi agreed, "but we will be. Nathaniel, file the injunction." He was already reaching for his phone. At 8:52 in the morning, with 7 minutes to spare, Nathaniel Cross filed the emergency injunction in front of Judge Eleanor Carver. Naomi was not in the courtroom. She was in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse, sitting with her hands around a cup she hadn't touched, watching the time on her phone. At 9:17, Nathaniel called. "Carver stayed the criminal referral," he said. 14 days pending forensic review." Naomi released a breath that felt like it had been in her lungs since approximately 6 the previous evening. "She also," Nathaniel continued, and something in his voice made her go very still, "requested that both parties appear for a preliminary evidentiary hearing in 11 days. She wants to review the forensic analysis of the server logs in context." "That's unusual," Nathaniel said. "Yes, Carver is a precise person, and she doesn't call preliminary hearings unless something in the filing caught her attention." A pause. I think she read the technical summary of the shadow layer. Okay, Naomi said. 11 days. Naomi. 11 days means Damian's team knows they have 11 days before this goes in front of a judge who is already interested. They are going to accelerate. I know, she said. Whatever they have in reserve, they'll use it now. I know, she said again. She was right. The acceleration began at noon. It did not come from Harwick or Voss. It came from a phone call to Nathaniel's firm from a journalist at a national publication, one of the large ones, the kind that still carried institutional weight, requesting comment on a story they were preparing for publication the following morning. Nathaniel called Naomi immediately. They have a source inside Rourke Metropolitan, he said. The story is framed as an investigation into financial misconduct by a former executive. The primary claim is that you were responsible for the diversion of approximately $2 million from a subcontractor payment account between 2018 and 2021. The publication says they have internal financial records supporting the allegation. Naomi sat in the coffee shop and felt the particular sensation of a floor she'd believed was solid shifting under her feet. That's completely fabricated, she said. Of course it is, Nathaniel said. But it's going to be published tomorrow morning with what the journalist describes as supporting documentation, which means by the time we file a defamation response, the story will have been read and shared by every person in Damian's network and most of the people in yours. Can you get ahead of it? I sent a cease and desist 20 minutes ago, and I'm preparing a detailed factual rebuttal with supporting financial records. But Naomi, he stopped. The publication has a 12-hour deadline before they run it. I can demonstrate the allegation is false, but documentation takes time and they know it. Who's the journalist? She asked. He told her. She knew the name. She had spoken to this journalist twice in a professional capacity. She had been quoted in 2 of his previous pieces, accurately, with appropriate context. He was not a bad journalist. I was a journalist who had been given what appeared to be documentation and had a deadline. Let me call him, she said. Naomi, that's not as a source, as someone with a rebuttal. She was already standing up, already moving toward the door. He's doing his job. I'm going to make his job harder by giving him a reason to delay. If you talk to him, Nathaniel, what I have is stronger than what he has. He just doesn't know that yet. She called the journalist. His name was David Park, and he picked up on the first ring, which told her he'd been expecting calls. Ms. Ellington, he said carefully. Mr. Park, I know what story you're preparing. A pause. I wasn't able to reach you through your former office for comment. I'm reaching you now, she said. I want to offer you something in exchange for a 48-hour delay. Ms. Ellington, I have a forensic accounting analysis proving the financial records you were given are fabricated. I have technical documentation establishing that those records were created using a shadow system built into Rourke Metropolitan's server architecture 14 months ago. I have a signed contract showing Damian Rourke personally commissioned that system. And I have a federal judge who has already stayed a criminal referral based on this evidence and scheduled a hearing for next week. She paused. If you publish tomorrow, you will be publishing a story built on fabricated evidence. And when that becomes clear in 11 days in Judge Carver's courtroom, your publication will be part of that story. Silence. You have documentation of all of this? Park said. My attorney can have it to you within 2 hours. A longer silence. 48 hours, he said. If your documentation holds up. It will hold up, she said, because it's real. She hung up and called Nathaniel and told him to send Park the technical summary and the Veritas contract within 90 minutes. Then she called Lucian. I need the recording available for a federal evidentiary hearing in 11 days, she said. Originals, authenticated, chain of custody, complete. It'll be ready in 7, Lucian said. And the payment authorization your father documented, the one to the Crane Investigation Company. How close are we to having the original? A pause. My attorneys have been negotiating with the estate archive. There's been resistance from one of my cousins who doesn't want the family's historical exposure surfaced. His voice was flat. I'm handling it. How? Naomi asked. Directly, Lucian said, which is the only way that works in my family. She believed him. The next 6 days were the longest she could remember since the week of her father's funeral. Damian's team moved fast and relentlessly. The financial misconduct story was delayed. Park held his 48 hours and then held them again when Nathaniel's documentation arrived and proved comprehensive. But Damian found other angles. Two of Naomi's prospective clients received communications from Rourke Metropolitan's legal team suggesting they conduct thorough due diligence on anyone currently under investigation for financial misconduct. Three of her professional references were contacted with questions that weren't questions so much as the deliberate insertion of doubt. One of those references called Naomi directly. His name was Gerald Okafor, a municipal infrastructure director in Philadelphia for whom Naomi had overseen a complex compliance review in 2000. He was 63, measured, deeply fair. "I want you to know that I did not give them anything useful," Gerald said. "And I want you to know that the nature of their questions told me a great deal about the nature of their situation." "What do you mean?" Naomi asked. "They asked whether I had ever had concerns about your financial judgment," Gerald said. "Ms. Ellington, a confident legal team does not ask fishing questions. They ask specific questions about specific things. These people are fishing." A pause. "What can I do to help you?" "Right now," she said. "Be willing to say, on record, exactly what you just told me about the questions they asked and how they asked them." "Consider it done," Gerald said. She added him to the list. The list was growing. On day 7, Lucian called. "The payment authorization is in my hands," he said. "Original document, dated the night before Isaiah died, authorizing a payment of $42,000 to a company called Pinnacle Site Review, identified as the entity that conducted the post-accident investigation into the crane malfunction." He stopped. "The signature at the bottom is Damian Rourke's." Naomi was standing in Nathaniel's workspace when the call came. She had been standing when she answered, and she was still standing when he finished. But the quality of the standing had changed. Something in her had gone absolutely still, in the way that only happens when you receive information that is so precisely what you needed that your body takes a moment to integrate it. "Get it to Nathaniel," she said. "Today." "Already in transit," Lucian said. 4 days before the hearing, something happened that Naomi had not planned for. Camille Ashford called her. Not through lawyers, not through intermediaries. Directly, from a number Naomi didn't recognize, at 7 in the evening. "I don't know if you'll speak to me," Camille said. Her voice was different from what Naomi would have expected, quieter, less polished. The voice of someone who had been through something in the last several weeks that had removed some of the surface. "I'm listening," Naomi said carefully. "I found something," Camille said. "In the files Damian gave me to prepare for my role on the ethics committee. There was a document. I think he included it by mistake because it references the ethics committee, but it's not an ethics committee document." She stopped. "It's a strategy document. It coordinates our engagement announcement, our wedding date, a series of financing meetings with 3 federal contract investors, and 2 political fundraising events scheduled around the wedding." Her voice was steady, but only technically. "Our relationship is itemized in this document under the heading Public Trust Positioning." Naomi was quiet. "I am not a naive person," Camille said. "I understood that Damian and I had mutual advantages in our relationship. I'm not pretending I didn't know that, but I did not know that our engagement had been coordinated with financing meetings. I did not know that the timing of our wedding was calibrated to coincide with contract announcements." Her voice tightened. "I did not know that I was a line item in a procurement strategy." "Will you share the document?" Naomi asked. "I already sent it to my attorney this morning," Camille said. "But I wanted to tell you directly, because what they're doing to you is wrong, and I have benefited from the situation that allowed it to happen." A pause. "I'm sorry." Naomi thought about several things in the space of a few seconds. She thought about Camille in her ivory dress, holding Damian's arm in that ballroom. She thought about how easy it would have been to construct Camille as a villain in this story. A simpler story, a neater one. She thought about how she had not done that even in the worst moments, because she had always understood on some level that Camille was a piece being moved, not a hand moving pieces. "Thank you for calling," Naomi said. "The wedding is canceled," Camille said. "Matter of fact. Final. I'll be issuing a statement tomorrow morning." Naomi almost said, "I'm sorry," and then realized that would be the wrong thing entirely. "Take care of yourself," she said instead. The morning of the hearing arrived with the specific quality of important mornings, ordinary in every surface detail and extraordinary in what was underneath all of it. Naomi dressed deliberately. Navy suit. No jewelry except her mother's watch, which she wore on her left wrist, where she could feel the weight of it. She ate half a piece of toast and drank 1 cup of coffee, and then left the apartment she'd borrowed for the 3rd week running. In the car, Nathaniel briefed her. "We have the following going into Carver's courtroom today," he said, counting on his fingers without looking at them. Priya's forensic analysis of the shadow layer, the Veritas contract with Damian's signature, the access grant processing log establishing Marcus Webb's credentials came through Harwick's office, Tessa's testimony on the administrator logs, the authenticated cassette recording with chain of custody documentation, Alessandro's letter with forensic handwriting confirmation. The original municipal archive filing of the Ellington integrated cost control method predating Victor's claimed invention by 22 months. The payment authorization signed by Damian predating Isaiah's death by 1 day. Camille's procurement strategy document. He looked at her. And Gerald Okafor's statement describing the nature of Damian's team's approach to his reference. "What do they have?" she asked. "The fabricated server logs, which Priya has dismantled. The statement Tessa originally signed, which Tessa has now recanted in writing. The media narrative, which Park is in the process of re-evaluating." Nathaniel paused. "And whatever they've kept in reserve." "They have something in reserve," Naomi said. "Everyone has something in reserve." The courthouse felt like all courthouses, designed to make you feel the weight of what happens inside them, which Naomi had always found clarifying rather than intimidating. She walked through security and down the corridor and into Carver's courtroom and took her seat at the plaintiff's table and put her document case on the table in front of her. Damian entered 4 minutes later with Harwick and 2 associates she didn't recognize. She had not seen him since the ballroom. He looked the same and completely different in the way that people look when you've removed the context that made them powerful. Without the ballroom, without the company, without the 43 floors of infrastructure he'd built partly on her work and entirely on her father's architecture, he was a 60-year-old man in a good suit walking into a courtroom that he did not control. He looked at her. She held his gaze for exactly as long as it took to establish that she was not going to look away first. Then she looked at the judge's bench. Carver entered and the room stood. The preliminary hearing was not a trial. Carver had been clear in her framing. She was here to evaluate whether there was sufficient basis for the criminal referral to proceed given the counter-evidence presented in the injunction filing. It was a procedural moment, but procedural moments could break things open. Harwick spoke first. He was skilled, unhurried, and extremely careful, presenting the fabricated server logs with the confidence of a man who had not yet been told how thoroughly they had been analyzed. Then Nathaniel presented Priya's forensic analysis. He went through it methodically, section by section, never raising his voice, never editorializing. He let the technical conclusions carry themselves. The shadow layer, its architecture, its behavioral mimicry, the timestamp drift signature, the Veritas contract, the access grant through Harwick's office. Harwick objected twice. Both times Nathaniel cited the specific exhibit. Both times Carver overruled with a brevity that told Naomi she was following closely. Then Nathaniel said, "Your Honor, we have additional evidence relevant to the broader context of this matter that we'd like to submit to the court's awareness, pending formal proceedings." Carver looked at him over her glasses. "How much additional evidence?" she asked. "Significant, Your Honor." A pause. "Present it," Carver said. Nathaniel laid out the structure, the intellectual property documentation, the payment authorization, the cassette recording. He did not play the recording in the courtroom. That was not what this hearing was for. But he described its contents with precise specificity. The room was quiet, in a way that rooms get quiet when something is being said that everyone in them understands is important. Harwick was on his feet before Nathaniel finished. "Your Honor, the defense objects to the introduction of materials from a source with documented adversarial interest." "Mr. Harwick," Carver said, "I haven't ruled on admissibility. I'm listening to a description of what exists. Sit down." Harwick sat. Naomi looked at Damian. He was not looking at the judge. He was looking at the table in front of him, and in his face she saw something she had genuinely never seen there in 18 years. She saw fear. Not social discomfort, not the managed irritation of a man whose plans have been inconvenienced. Real fear, the kind that lives in the body, not the mind. She felt no satisfaction. She had expected to feel something when she saw it, some version of completion or release, or the particular satisfaction of a balance restored. She felt none of those things. She felt the clean, cold weight of what was happening and what still needed to happen. Carver called a 15-minute recess. Naomi stood in the corridor outside the courtroom and drank water from a bottle Nathaniel had produced from somewhere, and thought about that evening 53 years ago, when Isaiah Ellington had sat at a kitchen table and found the right words for the thing he believed, and had spoken them aloud to nobody in particular, not because he thought they would become famous or be stolen or end up on a recording that his daughter would hear 30 years later, but simply because he thought them and believed them, and saying things you believed was what he did. Never build anything you wouldn't trust your own family beneath. A door opened behind her. She turned. Harwick came out of the courtroom alone. He was carrying a folder and he stopped when he saw her, which meant this was not an accident. "Mr. Harwick," she said. He looked at her. Then he said quietly, so that only she could hear, "Mr. Rourke would like one final opportunity to resolve this before it continues." "The number?" she asked. Harwick paused. $50 million. Full indemnification, and a formal private written acknowledgement from Mr. Rourke that Isaiah Ellington contributed significantly to the early financial architecture of Rourke Metropolitan. Naomi looked at him. "Contributed significantly," she said. Harwick said nothing. "Not created, not originated, not invented. Contributed significantly." Harwick looked at his folder. "My client's position on the specific language. Tell your client," Naomi said, and her voice was completely level, no heat in it, no performance, just the flat forward edge of a woman who had decided something and was done deciding it, "that I didn't come this far to accept language that still protects his father's lie. Tell him $50 million is not an answer to the question of what happened to Isaiah Ellington on that site. And tell him that what we're about to go back in there and present to Judge Carver is only the beginning of what exists." Harwick stood in the corridor and looked at her with the face of a man who had been delivering bad news for long enough that he could receive it too. "Ms. Ellington," he said, "my client authorized me to tell you one other thing." He paused. "He said you were the best person he ever worked with." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. "That was always the problem." She turned and walked back toward the courtroom doors. Behind her, she heard Harwick's footsteps going the other direction. Inside, the gallery was filling back up. Nathaniel was at the table reviewing something on his phone. Priya was in the second row with her files. Tessa was beside her, hands in her lap, back straight. And in the back of the gallery, in the last row, sitting with her coat buttoned to the collar and her hands folded in her lap, was Loretta Ellington. Naomi stopped. She hadn't known her mother was coming. She hadn't told Loretta about the hearing because she hadn't wanted to ask her to carry it. Loretta had come anyway, which meant someone had told her, Nathaniel, probably, or Priya, and Loretta had made the drive from Baltimore alone and was now sitting in the back of a federal courtroom at 73 years old, waiting to see what happened next. Their eyes met. Loretta gave her one small nod. The particular nod that meant, "I'm here and you can do this," two things communicated simultaneously through the compression of a single movement, the way people who have known each other all their lives communicate things that language takes longer to carry. Naomi nodded back. She walked to the plaintiff's table and sat down and put her hands flat on the surface in front of her. The courtroom doors opened at the front. Carver returned. The room rose. And in the charged, airless moment before the judge spoke, before anything was decided or lost or won, Naomi became aware of Damian on her left, his presence, his breathing, the specific quality of a man sitting in a room where he is about to discover how much of what he built was actually his to keep. Carver looked at both tables. Then she looked directly at Nathaniel. "Counselor," she said, "given the scope of what you've described, I'm expanding the scope of this hearing. I want to hear the recording." Harwick was on his feet instantly. "Your Honor, the chain of custody has been submitted and is in front of me," Carver said. "Sit down, Mr. Harwick." He sat. Carver looked at Nathaniel. "Play it," she said. Nathaniel reached into his document case. He removed the authenticated cassette. He placed it in the player that had been admitted as Exhibit 31. The courtroom was so quiet that Naomi could hear the mechanism engaging. The small, mechanical sound of a cassette player from 1996 preparing to give back something it had been holding for 30 years. The red button. Nathaniel pressed it, and Isaiah Ellington's voice filled the room. Isaiah Ellington's voice filled Judge Carver's courtroom, the way voices fill spaces when they have been kept too long in a small container, with a kind of pressure, an expansion, as if the sound itself needed room that had been denied it for 30 years. Nobody moved. Naomi had heard the recording once before, in Lucian's boardroom in Brooklyn, and she had believed that would prepare her for hearing it again. She had been wrong. The first time she had been in shock, which is its own kind of protection. The second time she had no protection at all. She sat at the plaintiff's table with her hands flat on the surface and listened to her father's voice move through a federal courtroom, and she held herself completely still the way you hold a vessel when it is full, and you are moving through a space where spilling is not acceptable. Isaiah spoke with precision and calm. The invoices, the parallel records, the delivery discrepancies. His voice carried the specific quality of a man who had organized his thoughts entirely before speaking, which she recognized, which she had always recognized in herself without knowing where it came from until this moment. Then Alessandro's voice, careful and accented. Then the older voice she had decided was Victor. Then Damian. 26 years old, speaking with the reaching authority of a young man practicing at being the kind of man he intended to become. If he walks out with those records, we lose everything. The tape ran another 40 seconds of ambient sound and stopped. The courtroom was silent for a moment that lasted longer than it should have technically lasted, the kind of silence that happens when a room full of people is recalibrating. Judge Carver looked at the cassette player. Then she looked at Damian's table. Damian was sitting with his right hand resting on the table surface, and his eyes focused on something at approximately eye level in the middle distance. The focused, unfocused gaze of a man who is working very hard to maintain the external form of composure while something underneath that form is doing something else entirely. Harwick was writing rapidly on his legal pad. Carver said, "Mr. Harwick." Harwick looked up. "I'm going to need your client to remain available," Carver said. "I am referring this matter to the United States Attorney's Office with a recommendation for formal investigation into potential obstruction, evidence fabrication, and shall, given the payment authorization submitted as Exhibit 44, possible conspiracy connected to the 2002 incident involving Isaiah Ellington." She paused. "This preliminary hearing is concluded. Both parties are to submit complete evidence inventories to my clerk by end of business Friday. The injunction against the criminal referral is made permanent pending the outcome of the federal investigation." She looked at both tables. "We're adjourned." The gavel came down. The sound of it traveled through Naomi's chest. The room exhaled. Movement, voices, the scrape of chairs. Nathaniel's hand appeared on Naomi's arm. Not grabbing, just present. The way you touch someone's arm when you want to establish that they are still in their body and still in the room. She turned and looked at Loretta. Her mother was standing in the back row. She had not sat down before the gavel, and she had not moved since. She was standing with her coat buttoned and her hands at her sides, and her face carrying something that Naomi had no single word for. Not relief, which would have been too simple, not grief, which would have been too simple in the other direction. Something that lived between those things. Something that looked like 22 years of silence finally having been worth what it cost. Naomi stood. She walked to the back of the courtroom. She stopped in front of her mother. Loretta looked at her. Her eyes were wet, but nothing had fallen. That was very Loretta. To be completely full of something and to hold it, to hold it, to hold it. "He sounded like himself," Loretta said. Her voice was just above a whisper. "Yes," Naomi said. "Precise," Loretta said. "He was always so precise." "Yes." Loretta reached out and straightened the lapel of Naomi's navy jacket. It didn't need straightening. It was a gesture with nowhere to go but toward her daughter, the oldest expression of love available to a mother. Touching, adjusting, claiming. "I was here, I am here." "Let's go home," Naomi said. "Not yet," Loretta said. "I want to see him." Naomi understood immediately. She turned. Damian was moving toward the courtroom doors with Harwick and his two associates, his head slightly lowered, the posture of a man who has been in rooms before where things went against him and has learned to exit them with enough dignity to regroup. He was 6 feet from the door when Loretta said, in a voice that was not loud but was entirely clear, "Mr. Rourke." He stopped. He turned. He looked at Loretta Ellington, and something crossed his face that Naomi watched with the full attention of a woman who had spent 18 years studying this man's face for information and had never until now seen what was currently there. It was not guilt exactly. It was recognition. The specific, involuntary recognition of a man seeing a face connected to something he has spent 30 years not seeing directly. Loretta did not move toward him. She stood where she was. "My husband," she said, "built something beautiful. He would have wanted you to know that he didn't do it for recognition." She paused. "He did it because he believed that the way you build things matters, that a system that tells the truth about money is a system that protects the people depending on it." Her voice did not shake. It was steady with a steadiness that had been earned through something Naomi could not fully measure. "He would have let you use it, if you'd asked." Damian looked at her. He said nothing. His jaw moved once. His throat moved. Whatever was organizing itself into words did not make it out of his mouth. Loretta looked at him for one more moment. Then she turned to Naomi, and the expression on her face shifted back to something that was entirely private, entirely between the two of them. "Now," she said, "let's go." They walked out of the courtroom together. The federal investigation that followed lasted 7 months, which is fast for something of this scope, and slow for people living inside it. Naomi spent the first month moving through the days with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been running at maximum capacity for an extended period and whose body has started presenting the bill. She slept too much and then not enough. She ate badly. She developed a tension headache that lived behind her right eye for 3 weeks before she acknowledged it was stress and not a tumor, and did something about it by taking 4 days off and going to Baltimore and sitting in Loretta's kitchen and doing nothing of any importance. Loretta made soup. Not because Naomi asked for it, but because Loretta made soup when people needed taking care of, a fact that had not changed in 42 years. "You're allowed to stop," Loretta said on the second day. "I'm not stopping," Naomi said. "I'm pausing." "That's what stopping is," Loretta said. "It's a pause that knows it isn't permanent." Naomi thought about that. She ate her soup. On the third day in Baltimore, she called Nathaniel and asked for an update. The federal investigation had expanded significantly from the initial referral. The U.S. Attorney's Office had opened parallel tracks. One focused on the fabricated evidence against Naomi, which was the most immediately documentable thread. One focused on the historical financial fraud involving subcontractor invoices and public contract manipulation, for which Alessandro's ledgers provided significant documentation. And one focused on what the investigators were carefully calling the circumstances surrounding the 2002 fatality on the Rourke Metropolitan site on East 116th Street. That third track was the one that cost the most to live with. The Crane investigation, Nathaniel told her. The original one, from 2002. Investigators have accessed the full records of Pinnacle Site Review, the company that declared the malfunction accidental. Pinnacle dissolved in 2007. The principal investigator died in 2011. But the records survived, and they've found significant irregularities in the methodology. He paused. The short version is that the investigation was conducted in a way that systematically excluded the most likely mechanical failure points from examination. It was not a competent investigation. Whether that incompetence was deliberate, the payment authorization, Naomi said, is not sufficient on its own to prove that Damian ordered the incompetence, Nathaniel said carefully. It proves he paid them before Isaiah died. It proves a relationship. What it doesn't prove by itself is that the payment was made to ensure a particular outcome rather than, and this is what Harwick will argue, to retain Pinnacle for a post-accident review that was arranged in advance as standard practice on large construction sites. That's a stretch, Naomi said. It's a lawyer's stretch, Nathaniel said. It's designed to create reasonable doubt, not to be convincing. But 22 years have destroyed too much physical evidence on that site to prove direct causation. A pause. "I'm sorry, Naomi. We may not be able to give you a definitive answer on what happened to Isaiah." She held the phone and looked out the window of her mother's kitchen at the small backyard where Isaiah had once built a raised garden bed, with the careful precision of a man who applied his engineering instincts to everything he touched. "I know," she said. The intellectual property case is clean, Nathaniel said. The municipal archive filing, the predating timeline, the recording confirming Damian's knowledge, that's solid. The fabricated evidence case is solid. The historical fraud on the public contracts is solid. The conspiracy connected to current procurement misconduct is developing. He paused. Damian is going to prison. The question is only for exactly what combination of things. She had known this was where it was heading. Hearing it said plainly still landed differently than knowing it. Okay, she said. There's something else, Nathaniel said. She waited. Damian's legal team reached out yesterday. Not Harwick, a different attorney. Someone handling the plea negotiation track. He paused. He wants to speak to you directly. Not as part of the legal process, before the plea is finalized. The kitchen was quiet. The soup on the stove made a small sound. Why? Naomi asked. I don't know. His attorney said he had something to say that he wanted to say himself. She thought about it. Set it up, she said. Nathaniel in the room. No recording by his team. Everything said can be used. I'll tell them, he said. The meeting happened 10 days later, in a conference room at Nathaniel's firm. No windows. Neutral furniture, the kind of room designed to contain difficult conversations without amplifying them. Damian arrived with one attorney. He looked like he had aged in a way that wasn't about time. Not wrinkles or gray hair, but something in the structure of his face, the way it held itself. The infrastructure of his confidence had shifted. He sat down across from Naomi and looked at her with eyes that had been doing the work of looking at things directly, which she could tell because it had clearly cost him something. They were alone in the room except for Nathaniel, who sat to Naomi's left and said nothing. Damian's attorney opened his mouth and Damian said, I'll handle it, and the attorney closed his mouth. Damian looked at Naomi. I knew your father, he said. I know, she said. I don't mean I knew of him. I mean I knew him. I was 23 when he first started working with my father. I was in the room for some of those early presentations. He stopped. He was the sharpest person in any room he walked into, and he knew it, and didn't make a performance of knowing it, which made him sharper than the people who did. He looked at his hands. I was 26 when he died. I have thought about the week before he died for 30 years. Naomi said nothing. She was going to let him get there himself. I said something on that tape, Damian said. If he walks out with those records, we lose everything. I've been telling myself for 30 years that I said that in the abstract, that I was talking about the company, that I was 26 and scared and talking about financial consequences. He looked up. But I knew what my father was capable of. I knew what Alessandro was capable of. And I said those words in a room with both of them. And 3 days later, Isaiah Ellington was dead. The room held that. Did you order it? Naomi asked. No, Damian said. She looked at him. I did not order it, he said again. I did not know it was going to happen. He stopped. His jaw worked. I went to my father afterward. I asked him directly. He told me it was an accident. I chose to believe him because choosing to believe him was the only path that let me continue being who I was planning to be. His voice had gone to something that was not quite steady. That was the decision. That was the real one. Not what I said in that room. What I chose to believe afterward, knowing what I knew about who my father was. Naomi breathed. And then you hired me, she said. He looked at her. Yes. Why? A long silence. Because you were brilliant, he said. That's real. Real. Everything I ever said about your work was real. And because... He stopped again. He was finding this harder than she suspected he'd anticipated, and she found that she had no interest in making it easier. Because I told myself that if I gave you opportunity, if I gave you access and resources and a place at the table, that was something. That was a form of compensation, Naomi said. He flinched. I was going to say acknowledgement. It's the same thing, she said. You were paying a debt you hadn't admitted you owed. To someone who didn't know the debt existed, who thought she was being given something based on her merit and was actually being given something based on your guilt. She looked at him with complete steadiness. You didn't give me 18 years, Damian. You used 18 years of my life to manage your conscience. Those are different things. He sat with that. Yes, he said quietly. They are. Did your father kill mine? She asked. The silence stretched. I don't know, he said. I genuinely don't know. I know he was capable of it. I know the timing is impossible to explain otherwise. I know that I am responsible for the choices I made in the aftermath, regardless of what I knew or didn't know. He looked at her. I know that Isaiah Ellington deserved better than what happened to him. And I know that I have spent 30 years building an empire on the foundation of his work, without ever once saying his name publicly. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what she'd come to understand over the last several months about the difference between justice and completion. Justice was documentable, prosecutable, arguable in court. Completion was something else, the thing you needed from the people who had wronged you that the legal system could not compel and could not deliver. A true reckoning in the interior of another person. She had known, coming into this room, that she might not get that. Most people never did. She was looking at something that might be close to it. Whether it was genuine or the performance of a man who had learned, finally, that the performance of accountability was his only remaining asset. She couldn't be entirely certain. She was not certain enough in people to be certain of that. But she had said what she'd needed to say. Isaiah Ellington created the system that built your company, she said. His name goes on the record. His name goes on the building. Not as a footnote, not in a press release. In the formal company history, in the court record, on the physical architecture of whatever remains of Rourke Metropolitan after this is finished. She held his gaze. That is not negotiable. I know, he said. And the settlement for the intellectual property theft goes to the Isaiah Ellington Foundation, she said. Every dollar. I won't take it personally. Your attorney's already communicated. I'm communicating it to you directly, she said, so that you hear it from me. He nodded. She stood up. He looked up at her from his seat, which was an unusual position for both of them. She had spent 18 years arranging herself relative to his eye level, and now she was simply standing, and he was simply sitting, and the geometry of it said something that neither of them needed to articulate. Naomi, he said. She waited. I'm sorry, he said. She looked at him. I know, she said. That's not enough, and it's also all you have. She picked up her document case. I hope it weighs what it should. She walked out of the room. In the corridor, Nathaniel fell into step beside her without speaking, which was the right thing. They walked to the elevator. The doors closed. Nathaniel said, Well? He's going to take the plea, she said. How do you know? Because he's out of moves and he knows it, and he's tired, she said. Tired people take the exit when it appears. Nathaniel was quiet. Are you okay? He asked. She thought about it genuinely, the way she had learned to think about questions that deserved genuine answers. Not yet, she said, working toward it. Damian Rourke accepted a plea agreement 4 weeks later. The terms included prison time on charges of obstruction, evidence manipulation, and conspiracy connected to current procurement misconduct. The historical fraud on the public contracts added additional financial penalties. The plea did not include a direct charge related to Isaiah's death because the physical evidence was too degraded to support it. 22 years had done what 22 years does. Naomi had known that was likely. She had prepared herself for it. Preparation does not entirely eliminate the particular shape of grief that comes with learning that some things are not resolvable. That time can destroy the evidence of truth the same way it destroys everything else, without malice, without intention, simply by continuing. She sat with that grief. She let it occupy the space it needed. She did not pretend it was smaller than it was, and she did not let it expand into everything. What the investigation did establish, formally and permanently, was that Isaiah D. Ellington had created the Ellington Integrated Cost Control Method, that Victor Rourke had appropriated it without credit or compensation, that Damian Rourke had known this for at minimum 30 years, and that the original accident investigation into Isaiah's death had been compromised in ways that were documentable even if their precise orchestration could not be proven to a criminal standard. Rourke Metropolitan's board issued a formal public acknowledgement. Isaiah's name appeared in the federal court record. Then it appeared somewhere else. The morning the plaque was installed at Rourke Metropolitan's headquarters, Naomi arrived before anyone else. The building was open but quiet. The early morning staff, the security rotation, the particular hush of a corporate building before the weight of the day descends. The lobby was where Victor Rourke's portrait had lived for 11 years. A large oil painting, commissioned and oversized in the way of men who need art to confirm their significance. The portrait was gone. In its place on the wall, at eye level, was a rectangular brass plaque that had been installed the previous afternoon. Isaiah D. Ellington, original creator of the Ellington Integrated Cost Control Method, whose work made this company possible. And beneath his name, in slightly smaller letters, the words Victor Rourke had stolen, and Damian had repeated in a ballroom full of roses, while Naomi stood at the edge and felt the floor shift under her feet. Never build anything you wouldn't trust your own family beneath. Naomi stood in front of it. She was alone. She had planned it that way. Some things needed to be received privately before they could be shared. She read his name. She read it twice. 3 times. The way you read something you have been waiting to see for so long that seeing it requires repetition before it becomes real. Her hand came up. She pressed her palm flat against the brass, against the raised letters of Isaiah D. Ellington, and felt the slight temperature difference between the metal and the air. The plaque slightly warmer from the lobby light, solid under her hand, permanent in the way that engraved metal is permanent, resistant to revision. She stood there for a while. Then she heard footsteps behind her and turned. Loretta was there. She had taken the early train from Baltimore and had not told Naomi she was coming, which was exactly what Naomi would have done in her position. Loretta walked across the lobby with the careful, deliberate walk of a woman who has given her hips more than they were designed to carry for more than 7 decades. She stopped beside Naomi. She looked at the plaque. Her face did the thing it had done in Carver's courtroom, that profound, compressed fullness, the face of a woman holding more than faces were designed to hold. Then she reached out. She touched her husband's name. Her index finger traced the I, the S, the A, the I, the A, the H. She traced his full name slowly, as if she were reading it through her fingertip, as if touch was a more reliable sense than sight for something this important. She stood there a long time. Naomi stood beside her and did not speak and did not move. Finally, Loretta lowered her hand. She looked at her daughter. "He would have been embarrassed by the fuss," she said. Her voice was rough at the edges, but held. "I know," Naomi said. "He would have said the work was enough." "He would have been wrong," Naomi said. Loretta looked at her. Then something happened in her face that Naomi had not seen in 22 years and recognized immediately. Loretta laughed. Short, quiet, surprised out of her by the rightness of what Naomi had said. The laugh of a woman who had spent too long around the grief of a thing and had suddenly, briefly, been given back the ordinary human pleasure of being amused. "Yes," Loretta said, "he would have been wrong." The Isaiah Ellington Foundation for Worker Safety and Ethical Infrastructure was incorporated the same week the plea was finalized. The civil settlement funded it, the full amount, as Naomi had told Damian it would. The foundation's mandate was independent safety audits for construction sites, legal resources for workers without corporate recourse, and a grant program for engineering students from underrepresented backgrounds. Naomi sat on its board. She did not chair it. She found the people to chair it who had spent their careers building the expertise she had spent her career adjacent to but never inside. Ellington Ethics and Governance opened its doors 6 months after the plea. The office was on the 14th floor of a building in Lower Manhattan, not the 43rd floor of anything, and the nameplate beside the entrance was not gold embossed or oversized. It was the same brass as the plaque in Rourke Metropolitan's lobby. Naomi's name. Her company. Nobody else's name underneath it. She sat behind her own desk and felt the particular unfamiliar sensation of space that belonged entirely to her. Tessa Rowan came to work for her 3 months later. Naomi had not asked. Tessa had sent a letter, an actual letter, handwritten, which Naomi had read twice, explaining that she had accepted a position with another firm after leaving Rourke Metropolitan, and that the position was fine, and the people were decent, and she found herself unable to stop thinking about what it had meant to see the right thing documented and proven and made to matter. She asked if there was a place for her. She said she understood if the answer was no. The answer was yes. Priya Shah consulted on 3 of Ellington Ethics and Governance's first 4 cases, which was not contractually arranged. It developed organically from the fact that they worked well together and trusted each other's precision, which was a rarer combination than it should have been. Nathaniel Cross stayed in practice and referred 3 clients to Naomi in the first year. She referred 2 to him. That was the shape of that relationship. Professional. Warm. in the way that professional relationships become warm when they have survived something real together, permanently characterized by mutual respect rather than any debt running in either direction. Lucian called on a Tuesday morning in October, 10 months after Naomi had walked away from the ballroom. She was in her office reviewing a client intake when her phone showed his name. "I need you to come to Brooklyn," he said. "What's in Brooklyn?" she said. "A boardroom," he said, "and a conversation." She went. The Moretti boardroom was the same room where Lucian had opened the steel box, where she had first held her father's badge in a plastic evidence bag and felt her hand shake against her thigh. The room looked slightly different in the October light, warmer, less heavy, or perhaps that was simply her own perception adjusted by everything that had happened in the months between. Every seat at the table was occupied. She counted 12 people. Senior figures from Moretti Logistics and its various subsidiary operations, the kind of assembled weight that indicated this was not a casual meeting. They looked at her with the specific assessment of people evaluating someone they've heard about at length and are now seeing in person for the first time. One chair was empty, beside Lucian. He stood when she entered, which she thought was interesting, and pulled the chair out, which she thought was more interesting still, and waited until she decided what to do about it, which she appreciated most of all. She sat down. He sat. "Independent director," he said. "Ethics, governance, and risk. Unrestricted authority to investigate any Moretti operation, including senior leadership and family interests." He paused. "Reporting structure goes directly to the full board, not through me." She looked at the people around the table. "Including investigations involving you?" she asked. "Especially those," he said. "Why?" she asked. Not rhetorically. She still needed to know. She had needed to know from the beginning, and she still did. "Because my family has operated for 3 generations in a space where the people with power decided what got investigated and what didn't," Lucian said. "My father made his choices in that space. Some of them were wrong. I am trying to build something different, and I have learned enough in the last year to know that I cannot be the person who decides whether what I'm building is actually different. That requires someone whose judgment is independent of my interest." He looked at her. "I need someone I cannot buy. I have spent 10 months watching you refuse to be bought." The boardroom was quiet. "Your family will push back," Naomi said. "The cousin who didn't want the archives surfaced. Others like him. When I open an investigation that touches Moretti history, they will make it difficult." "Yes," Lucian said. "And you'll back my authority over theirs?" "That's what independent means," he said. She looked at him. She had spent a year building her ability to read Lucian Moretti, and she applied everything she'd built to what she saw in his face in this moment. The steadiness, the particular lack of performance, the specific quality of a man who has thought about something for a long time and has arrived at the right place for reasons he is not entirely proud of the origin of but has made his peace with. She believed him. Not entirely, not yet, but enough to start from. "My terms," she said. "Name them." She named them. Not quickly. She took her time, because the terms mattered, and rushing them would have suggested she hadn't understood their importance. When she was done, Lucian looked at the board around the table, and they each gave some variation of acknowledgement, and he looked back at her. "Agreed," he said. She put out her hand. He shook it. Something moved between them in that handshake. Not electricity, which is the word fiction uses when it wants to compress something more complicated into a single physical signal, but recognition. The specific recognition of 2 people who have watched each other navigate something genuinely difficult and have come to understand through that watching something real about who the other person is under pressure. It was the most reliable basis for trust that Naomi knew of. Not shared values stated in a conference room, shared behavior witnessed across months of difficulty. She did not know what would come of it beyond the professional arrangement they had just made. She did not need to know yet. She had learned, at a cost she would not have chosen to pay, that the future was more bearable when you did not try to control its shape before you got there. She needed to get there first. The last thing that changed was also the smallest and the most permanent. 3 weeks after the Moretti board meeting, Naomi arrived at her own office building on a Monday morning. The October cold had given way to something sharper. November again. The anniversary of the morning she had walked out of Damian Rourke's ballroom with her resignation in the set of her shoulders and nothing else. She got off the elevator on the 14th floor. She walked down the corridor to the entrance of Ellington Ethics and Governance. On the wall beside the door, the brass nameplate read, Naomi Ellington, Ethics and Governance, the letters clean and exact and entirely her own. She stopped. She pressed her palm against it, the same gesture she had made in the lobby of Rourke Metropolitan, against her father's name. She felt the warmth of the metal under her hand and thought about Isaiah's kitchen table and the dice he'd used to explain budget allocation and the way he'd said, never build anything, you wouldn't trust your own family beneath, and had meant it, had meant every syllable of it, had tried to live inside the demand it made, and had died for the trying. She thought about what it cost to tell the truth in rooms where the truth was inconvenient. She thought about her mother's hand tracing the letters of a dead man's name. She thought about 18 years spent making someone else look like the smartest person in the room, and the particular relief, complicated, uneven, still ongoing, of standing in a room of her own making. She was not healed. She did not believe in the neat packaging of healing as an endpoint. She had sustained losses that would not be recovered, and had answered questions that would never be answered fully, and had learned things about herself that she was still in the process of integrating. She had built something that was hers, and she was still learning what hers meant, which was different from what she had thought it meant for most of her adult life. She took her hand off the nameplate. She opened the door. She walked into her office. She sat down at her desk. She opened the first file of the morning. She began.